The Bard of Hogwarts. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 376, Ino's Miracle Blooms. The changes in the valley surprised Ino. Honestly, in his solitude, he felt a faint sense of bias on the part of teacher Hans. After all, with the pages of the album torn, the miracle that had once allowed him to enter the story vanished. It would have been impossible without some thought. No one is a saint, after all. But even if he thought, he knew it was futile. The sanctuary truly belonged to Hans, and how one might dispose of someone else's property was entirely up to the owner. With this thought in mind, Ino quietly watched the valley transform. After all, it was truly his. The land outside Athens, where the magic beans gifted by the Grimm brothers grew, and where the colorful rivers of Rohan children gathered, floated in the sky. And now, the Ring of Fire, unchanged for so long, was also undergoing a transformation. Time passed by minute. The tulip in the flower bed grew fuller and brighter as time passed. Suddenly, a familiar tune echoed through the valley. From just a few notes, Ino knew this was the piece he just improvised outside, impulsively playing on impulse. Anyone with experience in performance knows that whether singing or playing an instrument, the experience of playing it is completely different from the experience of listening to it afterwards. And that was exactly what Ino felt right then and there. His impromptu performance, while beautiful, lacked emotional depth. It captured the soothing rhythms of the Shire and the dramatic drama of war, lacking the dynamism, or vitality, of real life. Having identified the flaw, Ino sat down and plucked the harp once more. An ordinary tune rang out once more. It lacked the tranquility and ethereal quality of the previous melody, nor the grandeur and heaviness of the moment. Instead, it captured the folk-like essence of everyday life. Old John and the surrounding residents, the ordinary merchants of Merchant Town, Aunt Julia and her granddaughter from Minas Tirith, even the many young wizards at Hogwarts whose names he couldn't recall. As Ino played, he thought of each of them. He might have caught a fleeting glimpse of these people, or perhaps had a passing encounter, but no one could deny their existence. Perhaps in the story, they were merely green leaves, but only with enough green leaves, absorbing the sunlight, could the flowers bloom with greater splendor. An ordinary folk song began to play. Perhaps it was the music, played by the same harp, that allowed the ordinary to easily blend into the ethereal and majestic atmosphere of the valley. Three distinct melodies converged, a grand movement seemingly born. And at this moment, the luminous tulip quietly blossomed. Horizontal ellipsis. Amidst a melodious melody, a golden six-petaled tulip detached itself from its branch and quietly soared into the sky. Its soft golden hue, like the sun at dawn, witnessed the miracle of all things awakening. Indeed, it was truly a miracle. Ino sat on the soft soil, quietly playing the music. As the notes gently danced, the mist that had previously enveloped the valley gradually faded. And as he looked, the valley was no longer its previously limited surface. It was visibly expanding. If the blooming tulips are the first ray of light at the dawn of the world, simple and pure, then the musical notes in the valley seem infinitely more complex. Like a multitude of stars, notes intertwine and collide, forming a complex and harmonious melody. Miraculously, these notes are more than just a collection of sounds, they are carriers of emotion. They weave throughout the valley, like a story, recounting laughter, tears, longing, sorrow, and hope. Accompanied by this harmonious melody, the entire valley seems to take on the color and warmth of life. At the same time, the frozen path to Middle-earth on the shelter's path quietly vanished. In the small town of Outbatch, Hermione was the first to notice, her figure suddenly vanishing. Standing in the shelter, Hermione gazed at the nearby valley, but no matter how hard she tried, she could not enter. But within her sight, she witnessed a shocking scene. The valley, once the size of a village or a small town, had undergone a dramatic transformation, its expanse stretching as far as the eye could see. The once vibrant rainbow river still hung in the sky, but now, in contrast, a golden sun, like a flower, shone brightly. The ground was daubed with playful figures, singing flowers, and oak trees with human-like features. It all felt like she was back in the forest where the ugly duckling had once been. It was so like the fairy tale world described in books. Horizontal ellipsis. As a bystander, Hermione was stunned. And Ino, the leader, after overcoming the initial shock, now felt a deeper sense of loss and recovery. His miracle was still there. He could clearly feel everything in the valley, every stone, every grain of dust. Thus, he was aware of the small tavern that had appeared in the center. The tavern was small, about 100 square meters, constructed from stacked cyan rocks, split into 2 floors. The architectural style was reminiscent of a medieval retro style. Of course, that was just the exterior. What truly revived Ino's sense of loss was the tavern's unique character. The tavern's door was closed, a simple walnut door. But he knew that if he pushed open this door from the outside, he would enter a world of myriad wonders. It seemed to hold countless stories, both ongoing and already completed. These included the ones he had read in the London Library, The 1001 Nights, Grimm's Fairy Tales, Andersen's Fairy Tales, Aesop's Fables, Alice in Wonderland. However, there was more to it than that. Through his perception, Ino also realized that if he pushed open this door from the tavern, he could welcome those favored by fate from countless fantastical stories. At that moment, he finally understood something. His own miracles had never been bestowed by Teacher Hans. If there was an answer, it was likely that he had possessed this ability since the moment he crossed over. It was just that, through some strange coincidence, he had never truly used it. Compared to what Teacher Hans had done before, it was more like opening the door from the tavern and welcoming a guest favored by fate. Looking at the closed walnut door of the tavern, Ino felt an urge to swim. But he quickly suppressed the urge and looked up at the sky. Suddenly, a tiny meteor shot out from the golden sun, shaped like a 6-petaled tulip. It trailed its magnificent tail feathers across the colorful river, heading straight for the ground. Ino sat on the soft ground, calmly watching the meteor hurtle toward him. Facing this golden meteor, he didn't dodge, nor did he need to. In the valley, he could feel every blade of grass, every stone, every dust, but he also controlled everything here. There was no place safer. The meteor flew away. Ino slowly raised his hand. On his right index finger, a golden ring, encrusted with a rainbow of gemstones, suddenly appeared. At the same time, the music in the sky gradually faded. As the last note fell, Ino stood up, turned his head, and brushed the dust off his clothes. This unintentional glance back caught sight of Hermione, anxiously watching from outside the valley. It seemed the meteor's speed had made her a little worried. In sight, Hermione was clutching the chestnut pen given by Teacher Hans, using it as a wand, casting spells at the valley. However, no matter how hard she tried, a barrier as vast as time separated the valley from the sanctuary, preventing even a ripple from her magic. In the valley, noticing Hermione's anxious expression, Ino raised a finger slightly. Soon, the vast valley, having completed its transformation, welcomed its first guest. Ino, are you okay? That meteor scared me, but I can't get in. Hermione, oblivious to the changes in the valley, inquired with concern upon entering. Her delicate, white hands were also busy, patting him up and down, as if to ensure he was unharmed. However, upon meeting those pure amber eyes, Hermione's movements paused, a blush spreading across her face. I'm fine. I'm better than ever. Noticing the girl's shyness, Ino decisively changed the subject. The valley has changed a lot. Feel free to explore. But I need to go out for a bit now. Otherwise, I might make her anxious, which would also be rude. Gently patting Hermione's shoulder, Ino's figure vanished from the spot. The Tower of Nurmengard. Grindelwald witnessed an interesting scene. The young man who had just been playing and singing suddenly reappeared in the same spot. Of course, this wasn't a big deal. Apparition could do that, after all. What really surprised him was that the previously dissipated music seemed to transform into another rhythm, swirling around the young man. But at that moment, Grindelwald's expression froze, and a lingering silver light flickered in his once dark brown left eye. Meow. That's all for today. Thank you all for your support and subscriptions. Thank you. Thank you. If possible, Odi would also like to ask for some money, to entertain the people in the story in the tavern. Snickering, go to the Three Broomsticks and get some butterbeer. Chapter 377 Divination from the Prophet with Different Eyes. Although the word change is a single word, it actually encompasses 2 meanings. Change refers to a shift in the form, nature, or state of something. Transformation, on the other hand, emphasizes a fundamental, complete transformation, even a transformation into something entirely new. The former is like the magical act of transfiguration, while the latter is more like the philosopher's stone, which transforms everything into gold. The same was true of the valley. It had undergone a profound transformation. As Ino left, Hermione surveyed the valley with curiosity. The vast expanse of land held little interest for her, but the proliferation of taverns intrigued her. Perhaps all Muggle-born wizards share this fondness for these medieval-style taverns. After all, their first encounters with the wizarding world began in the dingy, retro-looking Leaky Cauldron in Diagon Alley. Standing outside the tavern, Hermione pushed against the closed walnut door, but despite her considerable effort, it refused to budge. At that moment, a weak voice rang out at her feet. "You can't push it open. Only the king can open it. If you're bored, I can chat with you." The king. Hermione lowered her head curiously. At her feet stood a small puppet, about 9 inches long. She had seen these puppets in the valley before. When she first saw them, she had asked Ino about them, and was told they were gifts from the legendary alchemist Nicholas Flamel. But today, these puppets gave her a completely different feeling. They felt more alive. "Yes, the king. His Majesty Swinburne," the puppet said proudly, its head held high. "Ha ha ha." Hermione chuckled and bent down. As they drew closer, she confirmed her impression. The puppet before her was alive. Not only was it flesh and blood, but it also had delicate, lively features. It even wore a pea-sized blue whistle on its chest as an ornament, reminiscent of the Lilliputians from Gulliver's Travels. "What are you laughing at? This isn't funny." Upon hearing Hermione's laughter, the puppet seemed slightly annoyed. He lifted the whistle from his chest and placed it to his lips. A distant ocarina-like sound echoed through the valley. Soon, a rustling sound could be heard from the flowers. In a moment, Hermione saw dozens of fully armed figures clutching branches, forming lines as if about to charge. This scene amused her even more, but facing these living puppets, basic manners dictated politeness and respect. "All right. I apologize. I won't laugh anymore." Hermione took a deep breath, calming herself slightly before continuing. "Yes, Your Majesty, the Great Swinburne." "That's right." The puppet with the whistle nodded in satisfaction and waved, dispersing the soldiers gathered behind him. "You haven't answered my invitation yet. Do you want to play? I'll take you to see Grandpa Oak, the tree that bears strange fruit, not only gems and gold coins, but also a small mill. What happens in the valley never reverberates beyond its borders." After leaving, Ino returned to the broadleaf forest. Looking up, he spotted a small, desolate castle not far away. Nurmengard. A strange twist of fate seemed to unfold at this moment. Grindelwald, once the founder of a renowned wizarding prison, became his final resting place at the end of the story. Standing outside the castle, Ino gazed at the decayed gate, glimpsing its former glory and the famous motto, "For the greater good." But no matter how glorious it once was, it ultimately fell into disrepair after the story's conclusion. As a sign of respect, Ino reached out and gently knocked on the decayed door, even though it seemed as if a gust of wind could blow it open. Indeed, just as he knocked, the door was blown open by a gentle breeze. Whether by accident or design, after seeing the door open, Ino headed for the castle's high tower. The tower's spiral staircase, long neglected, was covered in dust. Ino didn't hesitate to use magic. The principle of being polite before asking for something applies everywhere. He ascended the stairs, step by step. Soon, he saw an elderly man with strange eyes. His right eye was a clear, turquoise blue, like the flame of a blue lamp, while his left was a deep brown. "Good day, Mr. Grindelwald. Excuse me for interrupting you." Upon meeting the main man, Ino bowed slightly and greeted him politely. "Welcome. We rarely see visitors here anymore." Standing by the window, Grindelwald turned immediately, his tone as calm as a retired man. "Actually, I'd like to ask you to perform a divination for me." "I'll do my best to satisfy you in terms of reward," Ino said directly. With a man like Grindelwald, no amount of rhetoric would work. Just like in the original story, the other party's pride made him willing to die rather than bow to the resurrected Voldemort. Honestly, Ino had a lot of admiration for Grindelwald. At least when it came to dealing with rebels, Nurmengard didn't employ the terrifying dementors like Azkaban did. Inside the tower, Grindelwald wasn't surprised to hear the divination request. That was easy to imagine. After all, he was no longer the leader of the Wiccan party. Perhaps the only skill he had left was divination. "Yes." Grindelwald nodded slightly. "But I'll state the fee up front. If you accept, the divination can begin at any time." "Of course. Please proceed." Ino made a listening gesture. He'd expected a lengthy explanation, but it went surprisingly smoothly. Meanwhile, Grindelwald slowly inched forward, stopping 3 feet from Ino. I hope that in the future, when making important decisions, you'll be able to follow your true heart. Half an hour later. Surely not. The divination's answer surprised Ino. Even a legitimate prophet couldn't find Voldemort's Horcrux. Meanwhile, Grindelwald seemed to detect the surprise in his tone. Divination isn't omnipotent. It's a form of magic, so it can be interfered with. He felt a little helpless. The young man seemed to overestimate the power of divination. If a prophet could do anything, he wouldn't have failed in the first place. Okay, sorry. Ino replied politely, realizing the other party didn't owe him anything. On reflection, this answer seemed acceptable. After all, Voldemort's defeat lay in Trelawney's prophecy. He must have been wary of diviners for a long time, and it was impossible for him to be unprepared. Ino gradually accepted the answer, but Grindelwald beside him seemed a little reluctant. If you can, find me a crystal ball so I can try again. Ideally, one that's ancient, entrenched, and made of beryl. Grindelwald spoke slowly. If the divination yielded no results, the previous agreement would be void, and that was not what he wanted. Although he had failed, the vision he had witnessed had instilled in him an urgent desire to do something for the younger generation. The key, or perhaps the greatest obstacle, lay in the young man before him. Horizontal ellipsis. Age, the inherited crystal ball. Upon hearing the request, Ino began to recollect carefully. Honestly, while he had pretended to be a fortune teller for a while, he truly had little experience with these divination tools. Suddenly, a faint call from within interrupted his thoughts. Sorry, Mr. Grindelwald. I must excuse myself for a moment. I'll be right back. Ino stood up and apologized, then vanished into the tower. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 378, Last Year's Gift, appearing at the Leaky Cauldron. In the valley. The moment she saw Ino appear, Hermione lowered her head like a child who had done something wrong. I didn't mean to do that. I just touched it and it fell down. Hermione pointed to a towering red mill in the valley. The huge windmill on the mill moved automatically without wind. She really didn't expect that the seemingly solid branches would break when touched. Similarly, she was glad that she only touched the mill and not the gold coins and gems on the other 2 oak trees. Off to the side. Ino was not surprised by the sudden appearance of the mill. After all, this thing should have been a gift from last year's harvest festival, just a delayed harvest. But what made him happy was that Hermione's accidental encounter also reminded him of something he had almost forgotten. It was a gift from the first harvest festival, 3 oak trees, 1 tree covered with gems, 1 tree with the blue lights, and 1 tree with a seemingly ordinary crystal ball. Grindelwald's request was instantly met. But before he did, looking at Hermione, who looked a bit guilty, he offered a soothing reassurance. Don't worry. The mill is already ripe. It will fall off on its own even if you don't touch it. And so it was. Now, at the end of August, the New Year's Harvest Festival was approaching once again. Last year's gifts really would fall off naturally. Hearing about them falling off on their own, Hermione breathed a sigh of relief. That's good. Otherwise, you'd think I was in trouble. Ha ha ha, not really. You can't get into trouble in the valley. Ino smiled and waved his hand. In fact, without his permission, Hermione couldn't even pick up a stone from the ground. By the way, you can go see the mill. It's very interesting. As he spoke, Ino turned to look at the red windmill. He knew the mill's purpose perfectly well. While he found it miraculous, there were more important things at hand. As his thoughts turned, a crystal ball, about 7 inches in diameter, floated out of the white marble house. The drizzle continued, silently weaving the web of time. Time, like this drizzle, trickled through the net drop by drop. In late August, a sudden shower washed away the last vestiges of summer's heat. Old Tom stood at the bar, boredly watching the rain outside, a rag bleached with starch in his hand, wiping the endless supply of glasses. In the past, bars in August weren't exactly packed, but at least they were bustling. But now, not only was his bar deserted, but even Diagon Alley behind it was deserted. The dark clouds hanging low in the sky and the desolate Diagon Alley reminded some older wizards of those days. Tom Abbott was one of them. Standing at the bar, he glanced sideways at the two young aurors assigned by the Ministry of Magic, and a sense of absurdity washed over him. Unlike ordinary people, as one of the Sacred 28, old Tom was well informed about some hidden secrets. Take, for example, the Azkaban prison, so feared by everyone. It had actually been broken into long ago, and the Death Eaters within had escaped. As for who did it, the answer was self-evident. Fudge suppressed the news, arguing that it wouldn't cause panic. This decision might have been right, or it might have been wrong. Regardless, he didn't want to get involved. Compared to the final frenzy, the current actions reassured many, which was why the Ministry of Magic only assigned 2 young aurors to guard the place. Another exchange. Old Tom sighed and shook his head. What exchange? It's a miracle your bar hasn't closed down. That attendance. A familiar voice echoed, and old Tom, from the bar, looked out the door in surprise. A year and a half can make many memories blur, but it can also make others deeply etched. He couldn't forget the young man outside. The man who once lived in the bar and always told Hannah stories was back again. Soon, as the young man entered, old Tom's surprise gave way to disbelief. The rumors were true. Although he had heard rumors of resurrection 2 weeks ago, he always laughed off things he hadn't witnessed. But today, upon seeing the witch behind the young man, old Tom suddenly felt that the world had become somewhat unfamiliar. But as the head of the Abbott family, old Tom was adept at controlling his facial expressions. His look of shock suddenly vanished, replaced by a warm smile. Huh? The bar's closing? Not happening. This is an heirloom, so there's no high rent, old Tom said half-jokingly, then glanced outside. The rain, which had lingered for hours, had quietly subsided. The sky seemed to have changed. You only know how to tell stories about your ancestors. Now, give us 2 glasses of freshly squeezed herbal juice, so your hard work isn't in vain. Ino smiled as he walked to the bar, beckoning Hermione to join him. It seemed a bit of a high-profile move, but he didn't care. After all, some things simply can't be kept secret. The more you hide, the more trouble you'll face. Hiding is cowardice, and when you're cowardly, flies and mosquitoes swarm in. Elsewhere, old Tom seemed to notice something, but he chose to ignore it, continuing the conversation cheerfully. Grass juice? Your taste never changes. Half an hour later. On Diagon Alley's main street, the rain-washed pavement revealed the unique sheen of cobblestones. Hermione, holding Ino's arm, glanced quietly around. The seemingly deserted shops around her made her feel like countless prying eyes were watching. Is this really okay for us? Hermione leaned over and whispered. It's fine, unless you give up your studies and live in seclusion forever. Unlike Hermione, who was deliberately controlling her voice, Ino spoke naturally. Hearing about giving up her studies, Hermione shook her head decisively. Forget it, I have a shelter anyway. If there's danger, I can hide. Yeah, it'll be soon. It won't be long. As he spoke, Ino looked up at the sky. The dark clouds that had been gloomy and rainy had long since blown to the banks of the Thames. He understood Hermione's choice. For almost every English wizard, the 7 years of study at Hogwarts are an integral part of life, otherwise, it would seem incomplete. As for his high-profile appearance today, he had his own agenda, perhaps even a desire to keep Voldemort in check. Once is enough to strike the snake, but it bites you. In fact, 2 days ago, after Grindelwald's help located the last Horcrux, he had already been planning an opportunity. He was planning an opportunity similar to the one he had seen at Hogsmeade, not only to completely eliminate Voldemort but also to publicly create a deterrent effect, resolving all potential troubles once and for all. Just like Nico's possession of the Philosopher's Stone, a near-open secret, no one had attempted to take Nico's hand for centuries. Ultimately, it's all about bullying the weak and fearing the strong. Magic at Hogwarts was a fairy tale, but when it entered the adult world, it naturally became a game of the strong. Meanwhile, with Ino's appearance, unlike the quiet shops of Diagon Alley, the Daily Prophet headquarters suddenly became bustling with activity. In a luxurious office, several well-dressed wizards sat quietly. Just got word that Fudge has relented. So, we can report on this. As one of them spoke, the previously quiet office suddenly erupted in a flurry of voices. I don't object to reporting on this, but what about your stance? Neutrality is always a good thing. Neutrality? You must have been half asleep and forgotten about Dumbledore. That's true, but he's still alive. Seeing the uproar erupt, the man who had spoken first banged on the table. No need to argue. We're always on the side of the advantage. Let Rita do the interview. They had a meeting at the Goblet of Fire, and I'm sure she'll handle it. With those words, the office, which had been a bit noisy just moments before, fell silent once more. The decision had been made, and the vast Daily Prophet headquarters, like an old machine, once again began to churn at full capacity. Zia Odie's sharing today, the Daily Prophet, editor-in-chief, Barnabas Guffey, is a newspaper headquartered in London. It is the primary source of news for wizards in Britain, and due to the newspaper's considerable influence within the British wizarding community, it tends to present events from the Ministry of Magic's, with whom it has strong ties, perspective. Unfortunately, the Daily Prophet does not seem to adhere very closely to journalistic integrity. Chapter 379, Interview with the Daily Prophet. As England's most influential newspaper, the Daily Prophet operates at full capacity, maintaining remarkable efficiency. Outside Flourish and Blots, Ino was stopped by Rita, whom she had met once before. Hermione, go buy your books first. Don't forget my copy. Hearing this, Hermione glanced hesitantly at the renowned reporter before her. After a moment's reflection, she finally nodded. Okay. I'll go buy the books first. After watching Hermione enter the bookstore, Ino slowly turned and said, Miss Skeeter, let's go over there. It's been ages since I've had ice cream from Diagon Alley. Rita followed her gaze and saw Florian Fosco's ice cream parlor, diagonally across from Flourish and Blots, slowly opening its doors. She didn't comment on Fosco's behavior, but it was a bit snobbish of her to be closed for the entire summer and then open just because someone did. Of course, she also understood that this was a natural tendency to seek profit and avoid harm. It was likely that many businesses in Diagon Alley would reopen starting today. Despite her thoughts, Rita immediately nodded in approval at Ino's suggestion. Of course. Mr. Fusco's ice cream was my favorite as a kid, too. She wasn't lying about that. Fusco had been selling ice cream in Diagon Alley for most of his life. As a historic ice cream shop, Fusco's was well equipped. A simple table was set up next to the window. After declining Mr. Fusco's kind offer of a parasol, Ino took the packaged blueberry ice cream. Sitting on the rain-washed street in late August, she felt the dampness in the air and savored the cool aroma of blueberries. If you have any questions, please ask quickly. Otherwise, my girlfriend won't have any free time after she finishes buying books. Ino ate his ice cream leisurely on a wicker chair, glancing at the cautious Rita. Meanwhile, after receiving permission, Rita didn't rush to ask questions as eagerly as usual. Instead, she hesitated. Ino noticed this, but said nothing. He'd given her the opportunity to interview, it was up to the individual involved to seize it. As a top-tier reporter, he knew better than to be limited to this. He sat quietly in a wicker chair, spoonful after spoonful of ice cream from the tub. As the blueberry flavor of the top layer faded, the chocolate flavor in the center emerged. In contrast to Ino's leisurely demeanor, Rita wished she had two brains to think. She knew this interview was different from the previous Triwizard tournament. While previously, it had been a matter of respect for a rising star, after the Battle of Hogsmeade, no one in England, and indeed the world, would dare to underestimate the young man before them. This was the man who had driven the Dark Lord away. In the past year and a half, the old film and television footage had been circulated extensively. Some even secretly formed a research club, inviting numerous learned individuals to analyze and discuss the battle. After a lengthy analysis, the conclusion was that the Dark Lord had indeed been defeated. While no killing curses had been cast during the battle, the dense clouds covering the sky and the numerous melee soldiers hadn't taken action either. The attack had been launched by only dozens or hundreds of archers. The archers, in particular, had provided evidence of their own actions, so naturally, no one would dismiss the clouds as mere decoration. Finally, after much discussion, the conclusion was reached. Swinburne had restrained himself because there were too many innocent people below. With this thought, Rita breathed a sigh of relief. After all, it wasn't the Dark Lord who was fighting. After all, the young man before her cared about innocent lives. As the pressure dissipated, her thoughts became active again. Sir, my interview will focus on the topic of life and death. Do you mind that? As she spoke, Rita took out her pen and paper and spread them out on the table. Of course, you may begin. Ino nodded slightly, pleased with Rita's performance. Okay. First question, how do you view death? Picking up her quill, Rita began writing quickly. Death is not the end of life, it is the beginning of another form, and I merely reverse this form. August 31st, 1996. A newspaper headlined "Death is not the end, rock the wizarding world." Like wings, the news soared across the English Channel, across the Atlantic. France, Germany, Austria, America, countless countries reprinted the Daily Prophet's contents, and the news spread across the globe. Death and resurrection, the age-old topic, once again became mainstream. Meanwhile, the name Ino Swinburne, after a year and a half of absence, reappeared in the public eye. The resurrection of the dead shocked many. After all, no one could resist. Even the most evil dark wizards might have someone they wish to resurrect and cherish. They excitedly picked up the newspaper, but after reading the contents, many sat back in despair. The conditions were too harsh. Just 12 portions of pure sands of time alone had left even the most learned scholars scratching their heads, for such material had never appeared in the known history of magic. Furthermore, the requirement for a perfectly preserved body left many speechless. The mysterious ingredients and demanding conditions reminded many historians of the renowned Nicholas Flamel. 560 years earlier, in 1436 AD, Nicholas, driven by frustration, had similarly acted, publicizing the ingredients for the Philosopher's Stone. This sparked a frenzy, and countless alchemists began attempting to create it, but all failed without exception. Of course, some harbored ulterior motives, seeking to seize the existing product. However, Nicholas's ability to live for nearly 700 years speaks volumes. The uproar and controversy were building, and it might take some time to unfold. But I know, the person involved, was currently sitting in the Granger courtyard, leisurely sipping afternoon tea. 12 parts of pure sands of time? Can you really resurrect someone? You'd better not be lying, or it's unethical. Hermione set down her newspaper, a look of confusion on her face. She knew her resurrection was due to the golden apple, not some unheard of sands of time. I'm not lying. Assuming they can find it. Ino glanced at the newspaper. The content was something he'd come up with on the spur of the moment during the interview. 12 portions of the sands of time, 12 black coffins, and a ritual magic for resurrection, using the blood of a virgin. This was the information recorded in the tower in the Grimm stories. If anyone could actually find these materials in the wizarding world, he wouldn't mind helping them out. Nearby, Hermione pondered the answer for a moment, then asked uncertainly, "So, there's nothing in this world? Only in the story world?" "That's right." Ino nodded earnestly, then chuckled. "So next time, you can go through the sanctuary and visit Arad. There are so many brilliant civilizations there." Ino paused mid-sentence, caught sight of Hermione's parents slowly approaching. Mrs. Granger, in particular, clutched the newspaper tightly, her face a picture of worry, a sense of survival, and a hint of anger at being deceived. The lie seemed to have been exposed. Ino glanced at Hermione quietly, and the two of them exchanged glances, each seeing a hint of helplessness in the other's eyes. Despite all their calculations, they had forgotten that as a direct relative of a wizard, they were eligible to subscribe to the Daily Prophet. Chapter 380, The Power of Pure Blood, Past Tutoring Lessons. I need an explanation. Is this the magical journey you told me about? You're lying to me with such lame lies. Mrs. Granger looked at Hermione expressionlessly. Apparently, she was furious. She picked up the newspaper and slammed it down on her daughter, who had learned to lie. Mom, listen to my explanation. Hermione rubbed her head. Even though the newspaper didn't hurt, she had to pretend it hurt. After all, her childhood experience had taught her that if she didn't pretend it hurt, it would happen again, and again. Seeing her daughter's pitiful expression, Mrs. Granger raised her hand, then slowly lowered it. You shouldn't be like this. God, do you know how terrified your father and I were when we read the newspaper? Mrs. Granger, who always presented herself as a strong figure, now seemed to have shed her armor, appearing much more vulnerable. Meanwhile, Mr. Granger, who had been silent until then, slowly spoke. I know, can I ask you a favor? He didn't blame his daughter, but instead looked at Ino calmly. Please tell me. As long as I can do it. Ino replied. Honestly, he felt a bit awkward being caught in the middle of this situation. After all, the Daily Prophet clearly stated who Hermione died for. Especially with Mrs. Granger's blow just now, while it had hit Hermione on the head, it had also hit him. Fortunately, Mr. Granger's words eased the awkwardness. My daughter is grown now, and I may not be able to discipline her. But I beg you, no matter what happens, please do not erase my memory. I'd rather forget her than lose her. Mr. Granger's tone was calm, as still as a mountain, standing quietly, neither ostentatious nor boastful. Yet, this very calmness revealed a profound fatherly love. Mr. Granger used I instead of we, and everyone present understood what this signified. At the same time, Mrs. Granger paused her scolding of Hermione and looked at her husband with an angry expression. Mr. Granger, usually submissive, showed no sign of compromise this time. My dear, I'm not only a father, I'm also a husband. He wanted to preserve his memories, to remember his daughter, but at the same time, he didn't want his wife to dwell on the pain. He endured everything alone. This middle-aged Englishman taught Ino a lesson through his actions. Watching this scene, he suddenly felt that his previous actions had been inappropriate. Although it was Hermione's request, no one had truly considered the Grangers' feelings. Just like in the original story, Hermione tearfully erased her parents' memories for their safety. But perhaps, at its core, this was also selfish. Thinking of this, Ino slowly raised his head, his gaze clear and at Mr. Granger. It won't happen again, I promise. No matter what happens. Besides, I won't put Hermione in danger again. That's also a promise I made. A smile crept into Mr. Granger's calm expression. That's good. It's all over. Perhaps we can have a small party tonight, since they're leaving tomorrow. Mr. Granger looked at his wife flatteringly. Honestly, Mr. Granger had changed quite a bit. If just now he had seemed as steady as a rock, exuding a sense of solidity and reliability, now the middle-aged man acted like a child who had made a mistake, seemingly at a loss. Mrs. Granger burst out laughing at her husband's sudden change. Good. Then I have to get ready now. In contrast to the laughter at the Granger residence, the Parkinson family home seemed somewhat calmer. In the slightly old-fashioned hall, a motley crowd of 20 or so young wizards sat. If Ino were here, he would undoubtedly recognize that this was all the Slytherin second-year students who had come for remedial classes 4 years ago. The difference was that, unlike the entire second-year class that had come back then, Draco, Goyle, and the deceased Crabbe were now missing. He really did it. Merlin. This is unbelievable. Daphne couldn't hide her astonishment. It wasn't just Daphne, everyone present was filled with amazement, except for one person. At the main table, Pansy smiled quietly. She always believed in Ino. Although Granger's resurrection was a pity, it was not a bad thing compared to making Ino feel guilty and self-blame. Okay, we can talk about other things later. Today, let's talk about werewolves. Pansy spoke slowly, her voice as cold as ever. But if you listen carefully, this cold voice has a bit more calmness and stability than it did a year and a half ago. As Pansy finished speaking, Millicent Spode took the lead and talked about the news she had received. The werewolves have gone crazy. There have been 29 attacks this month. In order to maintain the statute of secrecy, the Ministry of Magic is almost sending out sweepers. At the same time, many people present also began to talk about the news they had heard. And St. Mungo's Hospital. My aunt said they were overwhelmed and need to constantly screen cases, fearing someone might be mauled by a transformed werewolf. There are rumors in Nocturne Alley too, that this operation was orchestrated. The goblins at Gringotts are restless. My uncle also heard from the Muggle Prime Minister. It's said there's been a big commotion this time. Everyone present was speaking as best they could, and the power of Slytherin seemed to be on full display at this moment. As the news trickled in, Pansy fell into deep thought. Years ago, she had discussed the issue of Muggles and wizards with Ino. Even on the train when they left for their first year, when there were only 4 of them in their compartment, Ino had expressed similar views. Time slipped by. Gradually, the scene grew quieter. For some reason, everyone looked at Pansy. In reality, everyone present, including Millicent, had already had the answer in their hearts since their first summer training course in history of magic several years ago. Purebloods, precocious as they were, knew what kind of gathering this was. But their 3rd and 4th years also made them quite interested in this adult game. But later, as time went on, perhaps out of habit, or perhaps something else, they gradually came to accept Pansy as the organizer of the gathering. The sudden silence paused Pansy's recollections. She quietly looked at the familiar faces before her. For a moment, she said, "Sorry, I was just thinking. It's been a long time, about 6 years. Someone once said something to Daphne and me, and I still remember it." Pansy spoke slowly, but Daphne, beside her, looked curious. She couldn't quite recall what happened 6 years ago. That statement had a profound impact on me. It said, "What's the point of learning magic? We live like rats in a sewer, or even worse than rats." Suddenly, Daphne's eyes widened. She knew who had said that. On the train during their first year, she, Pansy, Draco, and Ino had discussed the statute of secrecy, and that was Ino's casual comment. Similarly, now she finally understood why Pansy had continued this small gathering in her second year. Horizontal ellipsis. The magical world's legal age was 17, yet none of the 20 or so present were under 16. Coupled with their pure-blood upbringing, they easily understood Pansy's meaning. But it was precisely this understanding that made them share Daphne's shock. They'd assumed it was just another ordinary gathering, a place for discussion and exchange, but who could have imagined such explosive remarks? However, before anyone could react, Pansy's cold voice rang out again, "Don't overthink it. I'm just expressing my feelings. I think the Ministry of Magic has paid too much for the statute of secrecy." As Pansy finished her words, everyone present had a different expression. But Daphne, alone, instinctively rolled her eyes. She was truly following suit. She remembered that when Ino had said this, she had used the same tone to tell everyone not to overthink it, that it was just a passing remark. Today's post, Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor. This ice cream parlor was owned and operated by Fortescue. In 1996, Fortescue was kidnapped by Death Eaters, and the parlor subsequently closed. Voldemort once sought information about the Elder Wand and Ravenclaw's diadem. When Fortescue refused to share information about his family's legacy, Voldemort murdered him. Chapter 381 The Train for the New School Year. As the morning mist enveloped platform 9 3/4, the annual start of school arrived as promised. As the morning sun gradually warmed, the light mist quietly dissipated. Only today, all year, could this ancient platform burst into life. At 11 a.m., a melodious whistle pierced the sky, and the mottled steam train began its warm-up. Similarly, the students, previously leisurely on the platform, now quickened their pace. The clamor suddenly intensified, with not only the urging voices of parents but also the meowing of various pets. The owls, in particular, hooted with almost discontent. After all, the little wizard's cage always clanged. As the noise on the platform grew, Ino closed the window in the train compartment. The clamor was blocked out, and at the same time, the sound of conversation within the compartment reached his ears. "You know, I was so heartbroken back then, I didn't even dare to accept it." Ginny looked at Hermione with lingering fear, her eyes reddening as she spoke of her sadness. "It's all over. I'm fine now, aren't I?" Hermione reached out and patted the back of Ginny's hand in comfort. "Anyway, I broke my promise. We were supposed to go shopping together last year, and I had already picked out Harrods and Selfridges," Hermione said with a hint of regret. "It's okay. I'm lucky enough to see you again." Ginny shook her head seriously. Compared to her friend's resurrection, shopping was nothing. "By the way, Hermione, did you know? Wonder Woman has new products. I'm telling you." Perhaps thanks to George and Fred's hard work, the Weasley family gradually emerged from poverty. With enough pocket money, Ginny became a regular at Wonder Woman, and became well versed in cosmetics and beauty potions. After all, what girl doesn't love beauty? If so, it must have been because poverty had limited her. Girls often change topics when chatting, their focus gradually shifting from life and death to beauty and fashion. Listening to the chatter around them, Ino couldn't help but look across. Across from him, Harry looked half asleep and listless. His slightly darkened eyes and listless expression made him look utterly exhausted. An adult seeing Harry like this would probably pat him on the shoulder and offer a meaningful smile. But Ino knew it was Snape's potion taking effect. As it stood, wiping out Voldemort's soul fragment would cost Harry half his life. This potion, which destroyed everything, might seem foolish, but it was a truly permanent solution. Whether it could ever recover was uncertain, but with Snape around, there was no need to worry. Thinking of Harry inevitably brought to mind the other two Horcruxes, and also Dumbledore. Horizontal ellipsis. Woo. As the last student boarded, the deep whistle blared once more. The ancient steam train slowly began to move. Once again, it fulfilled its mission, carrying a group of young wizards filled with magical dreams, bound for the ancient castle of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, hidden in the mist. Outside the window lay the endless fields and hills, the magnificent scenery of the English countryside. As the train moved on, Ino opened the window again. The autumn air was crisp, and a gentle breeze streamed in through the window. 4 people filled the small compartment. Hermione and Ginny were still chatting. After not seeing each other for a year and a half, they seemed to have endless things to say. As for Harry, he had already dozed off in his seat, eyes closed, as the train moved at a steady pace. Feeling the gentle breeze, Ino slowly closed his eyes as well. But his mind was occupied by thoughts of the past. Horizontal ellipsis. Honestly, Ino was somewhat puzzled by Dumbledore's actions. After Hermione's incident, the old headmaster went into hiding, as if he'd done something wrong. Not only did he rarely meet with her in person, he rarely even appeared in public. But Dumbledore wasn't exactly responsible. Without considering the original story, he could make a rough conclusion based on 2 factors. First, the old headmaster wasn't stupid. From a general utilitarian perspective, nothing Dumbledore did in the crab incident would have been beneficial. Dumbledore wanted to completely eradicate Voldemort, but for the sake of Hogwarts, or rather, for peace in the wizarding world, not for personal vendettas. With this fundamental premise, many conclusions were drawn. Furthermore, after a conversation with Hans, Ino further ruled out Dumbledore as a suspect. Like the Brothers Grimm, Hans wrote down the result, and as the story unfolded, it inevitably found a suitable trigger for this outcome. Perhaps Voldemort's visit to Hogsmeade was the initial trigger. Unfortunately, the dice weren't used. The first trigger failed, and the second naturally followed. Hermione was attacked and killed, so he used the dice to return to Hans' story, achieving the result. Cough, cough, cough. Suddenly, in the cubicle, Harry began coughing, as if choking on water. Another nightmare. Ginny was the first to react. As she spoke, she gently patted Harry's back to soothe his cough. "Yes, but it's better this time," Harry said, leaning back in his chair, still apprehensive. Ever since drinking Snape's potion 2 weeks ago, he'd been having dreams of near-death experiences, with all sorts of bizarre deaths. But drowning, like today, was truly a gentle death. Meanwhile, as Harry's coughing began, Ino suddenly thought of a question he'd overlooked. He'd actually discussed this with Dumbledore at Black House before, the difference between divination and prophecy. Asking Grindelwald to find the Horcrux was divination, while Hans writing down the outcome in the storybook was prophecy. Similarly, the protagonist Harry also had a prophecy. Perhaps because of this, Snape hinted at Dumbledore's suspicions in his previous conversation. In fact, it's really not Snape's fault. Ino knew very well that if he were in his shoes, he would also doubt Dumbledore without knowing everything. After all, that night in Godric's Hollow was indeed quite a coincidence. The train continued to move. After Harry woke up, the topic in the compartment gradually returned to Hogwarts. "You ask Ron? He's a prefect now, and he wants to be nailed to his own carriage," Ginny said in a mocking tone. Hearing this answer, Hermione covered her mouth and chuckled. "Ha ha ha, the Dragon Slayer also becomes a dragon. Who said it wasn't?" Ginny nodded in agreement. "I don't know where he got the courage to mock Percy before." Chapter 382. Long time no see, Mr. Principal. In the compartment, when the topic of prefects came up, Ino recalled the magazine Draco had once published. Perhaps due to funding or other reasons, the faculty and staff in such a vast castle are pitifully small. Perhaps for this reason, Hogwarts has adopted the prefect system. Starting in 5th year, each house elects 2 male and female prefects annually. 2 male and female head boys are then chosen from the 24 prefects across the 4 houses. These 24 prefects significantly alleviate the pressure on the professors. On the one hand, they are unpaid faculty members, while on the other, they enjoy the privileges granted by the school. It's truly a two-way struggle. While there's no salary, the castle's facade is well preserved. Think of it like the train with its dedicated compartments, badges, and dedicated restrooms for each house. This tangible respect makes even young wizards yearn for the position of prefect. In the front half of the train, a slightly empty carriage held a sparse crowd of about 20 people. Ron sat on a soft leather chair, wearing brand new robes and a badge polished to shine. Honestly, He was quite content with his current life, his family's prosperity, the honor of being a prefect, and even finding love. But then, a voice interrupted Ron's thoughts. "What are you thinking about?" Colin, who had been promoted to fifth-year prefect this year, suddenly asked curiously. "Nothing, I just feel happy." Despite being interrupted, Ron wasn't the least bit annoyed. Besides the fact that it wasn't a big deal, even if it was, he would have just laughed it off. After all, Colin's status was too high for him to handle. Seriously, without Colin, the deputy editor of Hogwarts once upon a time, he wouldn't have his brand new robes or his long-awaited new wand. It's nice to feel happy, but don't neglect your work. We're planning to open a branch off campus this year, and since you graduate first, we might let you take charge. Colin reached out and gently patted Ron's shoulder. Frankly, Colin, who had just entered his fifth year, looked incredibly immature, both in height and appearance. A naive underclassman taking a photo of a mature-looking senior should have been comical. Yet, far from being displeased, Ron felt a surge of delight. But after a brief moment of mirth, a crucial question struck him. He cautiously glanced at the platinum-haired young man before him, who stared anxiously out the window, his thoughts unfathomable. Colin, does he know about this? Ron's tone was uncertain. Colin was deputy editor-in-chief, to be sure, but only just. He could tell who was in charge and who was not. Draco. Colin raised his eyelids and chuckled. You can be assured of that. Work is work. No one brings emotions into it. Of course, if you're not up to the job, then I'd like to try. Ron interrupted before Colin could finish. Honestly, this was a bit rude, but he really didn't want to pass up this opportunity. Just by selling news and writing stories at school, he could buy new robes and a new wand. Becoming a branch head, just the thought of it filled Ron with excitement. Meanwhile, by the window, even after hearing his own name, Draco didn't bother turning back. His mind was now preoccupied with a conversation he had with his father before the start of school. Unlike his childhood innocence, this time he felt a genuine sense of oppression. He couldn't understand why his father had chosen the same path when the situation was so clear. This confusion left him with no interest in anything outside. Time slipped by unnoticed. Before dark, the train arrived at Hogsmeade Station. Some rode boats, some rode carriages. As all the students gathered in the Great Hall, it signaled the start of a new school year. Inside, Professor McGonagall strode briskly in, followed by a group of anxious young wizards. History seemed to have returned to its starting point, beginning with a group of young wizards entering the Great Hall. But no matter what was to come had to happen. Professor McGonagall, though a little older, was in high spirits. Now, I will call your names. You will step forward one by one, she said, full of energy, at the front of the Great Hall. With her voice, the 1996 sorting ceremony officially began. During the start of term dinner, Ino felt countless vague glances. Similarly, some of these glances occasionally turned towards Hermione. He didn't mind them much, after all, he couldn't stop others' curiosity. Although the Daily Prophet's interview had thoroughly answered all his questions, it seemed human nature always preferred to hear rather than seek answers in books. Amidst the constant stares, Ino put down his cutlery. The start of term dinner had come to a close. As all the young wizards followed the prefects back to the common room, Ino returned to the 8th floor of the castle. Long time no see. Professor. Ino greeted politely as he walked into the familiar headmaster's office. Long time no see. In front of the desk, Dumbledore put down the candy he had just picked up. I'm surprised. I thought you would be like Severus, but I'm very happy to see you. Dumbledore stood up and walked towards the only locker in the office with a smile. As several plates of candy were brought out, Ino didn't beat around the bush and directly stated his purpose. Professor, are those two Horcruxes still there? I'm planning to take action. After all, there's no benefit in delaying. The purpose of this trip was to confirm whether the two Horcruxes were safe, so that there would be no more mistakes. Of course, I've always kept them well. Dumbledore said calmly. From the tone of his voice, it seemed that he had known that something like this would happen. As Dumbledore finished speaking, two Horcruxes flew out of the drawer of the desk. The ring from the old Gaunt house, and the gold cup from Hufflepuff. I'm relieved to leave the items with you. The two Horcruxes were placed on the table, but Dumbledore didn't even glance at them, not even at the legendary resurrection stone. Ino was somewhat surprised by this calmness. It wasn't the trust he showed, but Dumbledore's attitude toward the Resurrection Stone. After all, with Hermione's example, there was no reason for such a move. Surprising? Actually, after you, I also met with Gellert. Dumbledore smiled, a smile that held a touch of relief, but also a hint of a successful prank. So, what news did you get? The moment he said this, Ino felt a little abrupt. He had just been thinking about prophecies and divination on the train, and he blurted it out without hesitation. Of course, if it's private, just ignore it. But let's talk about Senior Tom first. His actions amaze me. Quietly, he changed the subject, giving both of them a way out and avoiding awkwardness. Meanwhile, as Ino continued his story, Dumbledore's expression shifted into a daze. For a long moment. That's perfectly in line with his methods, his manipulation of human hearts, Dumbledore murmured softly. Indeed. Ino sighed in deep agreement. Who could have imagined there weren't even any Horcruxes? Relying on Horcruxes, yet not having crafted them, and not only that, but also employing magic to disrupt divination. This manipulation of human nature was exquisitely executed. Yet, despite all his calculations, Voldemort hadn't anticipated Grindelwald's fairy tale crystal ball, which produced unexpected results. Honestly, Ino was genuinely surprised when the divination results first arrived. No matter who you are, you can never find something that doesn't exist. And without finding the last Horcrux, Voldemort would always have something to fall back on. Meanwhile, Dumbledore's gaze grew increasingly sharp. Do you need me to come with you? I'm over 100 years old, but I'm still quite useful. Come if you want. I'm short of someone to hold the mirror for me anyway. Ino didn't object to the old headmaster's suggestion. In fact, he was more interested in seeing what kind of expression Voldemort would have upon the joint visit of the two, his secret now exposed. Would he still leisurely eat his butter toffee, as he had on previous visits? Thinking of this, Ino reached out and took a piece of the freshly served candy. It tasted just as sweet as ever. Zia Odie's sharing today, Gellert Grindelwald. Born and died. 1883 March 1998. Physical characteristics. In his youth, Grindelwald had golden hair, blue eyes, and a face often depicted as happy and wild. Nearing the end of his life, Grindelwald lay in a top cell at Nurmengard, frail and emaciated, with sunken eyes and nearly all his teeth missing. Graduated from Durmstrang, dropped out. Wand, Elder Wand. Family, Bathilda Bagshot, great-aunt. Gellert Grindelwald is considered one of the most powerful dark wizards of all time, second only to Voldemort. Grindelwald was a man of talent, charm, and a captivating personality. His unique personality made him particularly drawn to the dark arts. Grindelwald attended Durmstrang Academy. While Durmstrang was relatively tolerant of the study and use of the dark arts, Grindelwald's experiments were so egregious that the school could not turn a blind eye and ultimately expelled him. Chapter 383 Understanding Dumbledore. Hogwarts curfew begins at 10:30 p.m. This might seem like a generous time, but in reality, it's only for students in their 5th year and above. Young wizards and witches below 5th year must return to the common room an hour earlier, after 9:30 p.m. At 10 p.m., Ino left the headmaster's office. The castle was no longer bustling at night. After all, more than half of the young wizards were under curfew. Having left as a 4th year and now returning as a 6th year, Ino was experiencing the castle for the seniors for the first time. The 8th floor, the highest level of the castle, was level with Ravenclaw Tower. Standing at the turning point of the sliding staircase, looking down, it felt like a Muggle high school. Looking at the students passing by, while many of their faces seemed vaguely familiar, the expressions on their faces were unfamiliar. There was a palpable sense of distance, respect, and a hint of fear. A familiar castle, familiar people, but somehow, the old feeling faded. Just as a sense of melancholy began to take hold, a magnetic voice echoed in his ears. Does this feel strange to you? A little. Ino didn't turn around, but he recognized the voice. That's normal. A raven soaring through the sky, overlooking the world, always feels lonely. The voice behind him sounded again, but this time with a more lamenting tone. What have you been through, Chew? Ino turned around and saw Chew, now in 7th grade. The once young girl now possessed the allure of a grown woman. I'm fine. It's you, on the other hand, who seems out of place. As Chew spoke, she also walked to the stairs and stood at the corner of the 8th floor, looking down. Although it was already 10 o'clock, the number of students passing by hadn't decreased. The word out of place resonated with Ino. To be honest, he did feel a little strange returning to Hogwarts this time. But it was at that moment that Ino began to understand Dumbledore. He understood why this legendary wizard always played such childish pranks, why he would hide away to eat candy, and even why he would pretend to be crazy and stupid to disguise himself. All of this, as Chu had said, was loneliness. Ideals shattered, best friends turned against each other, brothers turned enemies. Even if he defeated Grindelwald, ended everything himself, and returned to Hogwarts in glory, he would still face the distant and odd gazes of the castle. At that moment, Ino stood quietly in the 8th floor corridor, wordlessly gazing at the bustling crowd below. Similarly, the wisdom of Ravenclaw was on display at this moment. After Cho finished speaking, she wisely chose silence. Sometimes, the highest wisdom lies in silence. Time slipped by. A long moment passed. It's okay. It's really okay. I won't act cute or silly, but I can tell stories. Ino muttered softly to himself in the corridor. Time passed, generations and decades passed. This generation might be filled with awe and alienation, but the next generation of young wizards would be different once they arrived. Besides, they had countless stories to tell. It was 10:30 in the evening. Ino returned to his familiar dormitory. A year and a half had passed, and nothing had changed. As the door opened, he saw a dazed Draco. As time passed, the youthfulness of the past faded, and Draco now looked like a younger version of Lucius. The only difference, perhaps, was Draco's hairline, which was noticeably higher than Lucius's. What's wrong with you? You look listless. Entering the dormitory, Ino took off his robe and casually hung it on the hanger behind the door. A sudden noise in the room made Draco jump, but once he saw who it was, he relaxed again. You're back. How nice to see you back. I always clean the things you left behind, and they're in great condition. Draco turned, a flicker of pride in his eyes. Ho-ha, thank you, my friend. Ino saw the fleeting pride inside that even after not seeing each other for so long, the familiarity hadn't faded. Despite the passing of time, Draco's personality remained unchanged. He was still the same proud young wizard. He watched the green, wind-up alarm clock by his bedside, the seconds ticking softly. A familiar dorm, familiar people. The past flowed like a stream through stone. Though it carried away grains of sand and dust, it also left traces of life behind. In a trance, Ino was transported back to an afternoon in second year. After finishing a day of classes, he returned to his dorm to find Draco playing tricks on his alarm clock. His excuse, apparently, was that with an alarm clock, he didn't need to be woken up, which embarrassed him. Tell me what happened. You haven't inherited Uncle Lucius's cunning. You can't hide your face. Ino pulled up a chair and sat down, his tone relaxed. Perhaps out of trust in his friend, or perhaps because he suddenly heard his father's name, Draco decided to keep it secret. I remember telling you that when I was a child, my mother and I lived in a safe house. Reliving the past, Draco recounted the memories from deep within. Although many details had become blurred with time, the image of his father's tired and anxious face every time he came home became clearer and clearer. Yes, our Malfoy family chose the wrong side. After that man's downfall, my father has been constantly running around, trying to avoid being held accountable, to prevent my mother and me from being affected. Draco recounted his story, his voice remarkably calm. As the alarm clock's second hand gently turned 10 circles, Ino understood why he seemed so distracted. Draco, theoretically, your father did the right thing. Ino spoke slowly, framing the matter. In reality, no matter how you look at it, Lucius's actions were flawless. Furthermore, the shocking events of 15 years ago served as a valuable lesson for many. No one could have imagined that the once mighty Dark Lord would fall so easily, and to a woman, a baby. With this precedent in mind, Ino understood Lucius's actions. Similarly, this understanding prevented him from dissuading him. Don't worry. Come home and have a good Christmas this year. Ino reached out and patted Draco's shoulder. Christmas. Draco looked up, bewildered. The sudden change of topic made him unable to react for a long time. A long time passed. Suddenly, Draco seemed to have figured something out. His eyes became brighter, and he was no longer decadent. Okay. Christmas. This year I will give you a collection of Quidditch dolls, not the original ones made of goblin gold. Ha, it's a deal. Ino smiled and nodded. After seeing Draco recover, He was relieved. Wizards are not afraid of excitement or being beaten, but they are afraid of wild thoughts. Speaking of wild thoughts, another black-haired girl from Slytherin suddenly flashed through Ino's mind. As for Pansy, he also planned to find a chance to have a good talk, although they have had less contact with each other since entering the 4th grade. But no matter what, some things still need to be made clear. Before graduation, let the things of the students' days end in the students' days. Chapter 384 The Magical Mill and Running a Tavern. In the Slytherin dormitories. As Draco put aside his worries, the atmosphere in the dormitory returned to normal. Go to bed. We have classes tomorrow. As the alarm clock struck midnight, Ino slowly drew down the curtains. Lying on the soft bed, a familiar feeling settled over him. Telling Draco about Christmas wasn't just a random thought, it was the result of a discussion with Dumbledore after the dinner. Voldemort had been dealt with it before Christmas. The 3 extra months had been entirely Dumbledore's initiative. Yes, a request. Although Snape had been very secretive, Harry's condition could be hidden from others, but not from Dumbledore. Never mind, I'll find a chance to ask tomorrow and help if I can. Lying in bed, Ino sighed softly. Some things truly deserve to be dealt with sooner rather than later. At the same time. In contrast to the tranquility of the Slytherin dormitories, the Gryffindor girls' dormitory was bustling with activity. It was clearly only a 6th-year dormitory, but now there were many girls from other years. Many, including Ginny, were fascinated by Hermione's legendary story. Stung by the killing curse, she transformed into a ghost. Then, as everyone witnessed, her spirit shone with a brilliant golden light, soaring into the deep night sky like a shooting star. And then, a year and a half later, she reappeared before everyone's eyes, alive and well. Resurrection from the dead. This was bound to be a historic, astonishing event. Unlike Ino, people were in awe of her power and didn't dare to engage with her. At this moment, Hermione was surrounded. Tell me more about what it feels like to be a ghost. What did you see in the night sky? Is it the afterlife? What is it like? Faced with a barrage of questions, Hermione rubbed her brow helplessly. She had already asked many of the same questions many times. This isn't going to go on. It's not over today, and this isn't just for Gryffindor. Ginny, noticing Hermione's expression, whispered in her ear. I know, but what can I do? Hermione looked around. The 6th-year girls' dormitory was already overflowing. Unable to gather close, many people could only discuss from a distance, their chatter incessant. I have an idea. Ginny whispered in Hermione's ear. Quiet. Quiet. Ginny stood barefoot on the bed, her gestures and high-pitched voice gradually silencing the discussion. At the same moment, Hermione also stood up. I know everyone's interested in my resurrection, but talking about it over and over again is limited, and it also means many people can't hear clearly or fully. Hermione's words elicited frequent nods from the girls in the distance, who couldn't hear clearly and couldn't squeeze in. So, I'll be writing a book during this time, and it'll be available to everyone before summer vacation. A quarter of an hour passed. The noisy crowd in the dormitory gradually dispersed, leaving only the 6th-year girls who had originally been there. That's a good idea. It saves them from endless questions. Parvati, changing into her pajamas, didn't forget to express her opinion. Although the scene was a bit risque for a moment, the girls present were used to it. Yes. Lavender Brown nodded in agreement. But it's really time to rest now. I still have plans to make up for my OWL exams this year. Hermione said softly, sitting cross-legged on the bed. This also brought today's discussion to a close. She lowered the curtains. Though clearly exhausted, Hermione tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. Her mind raced with random images. One moment, she imagined a future book, the next, a past dream forest. A silver-gray sea otter, embracing a black swan, the two snuggling together for the winter. Warm feathers, the soft touch? Really? Tossing and turning in bed, Hermione sighed softly, disappearing into the curtains. At the same time, Ino had just fallen into a light sleep, but a faint call from her heart forced her to open her eyes. In early September, the temperature in the Scottish Highlands wasn't very high. But then again, it wasn't like Austria, where it was only a few degrees Celsius. In the valley, Hermione wore a simple yet elegant pair of light blue pajamas. Perhaps due to the temperature, the style was slightly cool. The light hue contrasted with her fair, delicate skin, like the first breeze of an early autumn morning, refreshing and elegant. At that moment, Hermione leaned against the door of the Valley Tavern, her posture imbued with a languid, natural beauty. There was no trace of affectation or pretense, as if she had just awakened from a sweet dream, still lingering sleepiness. "I can't sleep," Hermione said, leaning against the door after seeing Ino emerge into the valley. Her voice was soft and slightly raised, with a hint of coquettishness and tenderness in her tone. "Then what should I do?" "A dreamless sleep potion," Ino replied drowsily, having just woken from a light slumber and still struggling to find his rhythm. "I have my own potion." Hearing about the dreamless sleep potion, Hermione pursed her lips in annoyance. "Oh. See, I completely forgot." After a brief moment of adjustment, Ino gradually regained consciousness. Giving potions to a would-be potions master, how could he have thought of that? "So, do you want a midnight snack? It's a good opportunity to test the magic of the mill." Ino's tone was a touch of boasting. He had been pleasantly surprised by the magical mill he had received as a gift during last year's harvest festival. Whether it was dirt, sand, water, or anything more common, simply place it in the mill, and it would grind the desired ingredient according to the user's wishes. This could be snow-white wheat flour, fresh fruits and vegetables, even milk and honey. It was another room of requirement. Similarly, this only made him even more excited for this year's harvest festival gift in a month. Meanwhile, as Ino finished speaking, a look of bewilderment crossed Hermione's face. She glanced down at her pajamas, confirming that a button was undone, and her expression became complicated. "Okay. A midnight snack then." Half an hour later. In an elegant tavern, Hermione sipped freshly squeezed juice while observing the surrounding furnishings. The pub isn't large, measuring just over 100 square meters, perhaps no more than 2. Under the dim light, the entire place exudes a mysterious and profound air. The interior is a touch more rustic and elegant, with stone walls and dark wooden beams, revealing the marks of time. In the center sits a long oak bar, inlaid with bronze drinkware, gleaming with a cool sheen. High-backed wooden chairs and vintage round tables surround it, as if waiting for the stories of the future. The walls are covered with meticulously rendered landscape paintings. From the gentle dawn to the dazzling sunset, from the tranquil rainy days to the bright, clear skies, the paintings seem to capture the passage of time and the play of light and shadow. Towering clouds shroud the space, endless grasslands stretch endlessly, the vast ocean ripples with majestic waves. Though only a foot and a half in frame, the paintings evoke a sense of wonder, as if stepping into another world. Following the rows of portraits, a standing organ and an old gramophone sat in a corner of the tavern. These two distinct instruments, seemingly transcending time, filled the entire space with an indescribable calm and soothing tranquility. "Ino, why don't we try out the tavern's magic? I mean, run it and entertain unexpected guests," Hermione suggested excitedly, looking around. Ever since Ino had mentioned the tavern's effects, she'd been wanting to try it. Just think, running a magical tavern and entertaining characters from stories, how fascinating it would be. The Gryffindor gene was awakening. However, that'll have to wait until this weekend, unless you skip school tomorrow, Ino said decisively. He'd known all along that time in the valley flowed at the same speed as the outside world, and that was why he hadn't attempted to run the tavern. After all, the original plan was to wait until Voldemort was dealt with. But with Hermione's suggestion today, and Dumbledore's request, they could give it a try this weekend. Waiting 3 months seemed a bit too long. Meanwhile, Hermione, upon hearing about skipping classes, instinctively shook her head. "Okay, then, this weekend. Let's see who's the first visitor to the pub." Clearly, the OWL exams held more weight than satisfying curiosity. Today's Zyodi sharing, Parvati Patil. Family, Parvati has a twin sister, Padma Patil, who was sorted into Ravenclaw. Appearance, Harry's roommate, Dean, called the sisters the prettiest girls in the grade. In 1991, Parvati was sorted into Gryffindor, sharing a dorm with Hermione and Lavender, with whom she later became close friends. During the 1993-1994 school year, Lavender and Trelawney developed a close relationship. After her divination exam, Parvati proudly told Harry and Ron that Trelawney said she had all the makings of a true seer. In 1995, Parvati joined the DA at the Hog's Head. In 1996, shortly after the start of school, the Patil sisters' parents wanted to take them home, but they ultimately stayed. When the Iron Trio returned to Hogwarts in 1998, They saw the Paddle sisters in the Room of Requirement. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Parvati fought Traverse and helped Dean cast a full-body binding charm on Dolohov. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 385 Fudge's Dilemma. Early in the morning, as the golden six-petaled tulips hung high in the sky quietly blossomed, the valley welcomed a new day. The first rays of golden light shone, like the gentlest awakening. On the second floor of the tavern, in a quaint guest room, Hermione. "Wake up." Ino gently nudged the girl beside him. Actually, after last night's midnight snack, many things didn't need much explanation, everything just happened naturally. "Let me sleep a little longer, I'm so tired," Hermione muttered, burying her head in her pillow. Then, her entire form transformed into a silver-gray sea otter, as if this was the only way to avoid being bullied. Looking at the soft, supple sea otter in the bed, Ino was at a loss for words. Logically, Hermione, in her current state, would be wise to sleep a little longer. "Then get some more sleep, and I'll get someone to get you some leave." Ino stood up, peering out the window toward the tavern. Last night, he'd discovered a flaw in the valley that wasn't really a flaw. While the daytime offered the golden tulip's sun, the nights lacked the embellishment of the moon and stars. Otherwise, the night sky always seems a bit monotonous. At the same time, after transforming into an otter, Hermione curled up inward, the soft bed providing a temporary reprieve from the previous night's fatigue. But just as she was about to drift off, her furry ears twitched, accurately catching another word. "Looking for someone, to ask for leave," Hermione repeated drowsily. A moment passed. "Oh my god. Asking for leave? I'm late," a sharp voice echoed. There was a commotion in the tavern room, then silence. Hermione left the valley. Ino had always been a little confused about this. Logically, the sanctuary and the valley were two separate spaces, theoretically severed from any previous intersection. But in reality, they were connected. In his spare time, he had pondered the reason, but ultimately only came up with a vague answer. It seemed to be because of the ice flowers and maple trees he had planted in the sanctuary. The vegetation he had planted became a kind of anchor, a kind of coordinate, providing a sense of connection between the two unrelated worlds. But speculation is still speculation, and this can only be tested later. Looking for the moon and stars, and now there's another thing to plant trees. Standing in the tavern room, Ino added another itinerary for after Christmas. Having a mountain of treasure but no time to explore it all comes down to the speed of time. After all, even though the valley has changed and one can now freely enter the story, the speed of time has not been verified. If it remains as fleeting as before, everything will be fine. Otherwise, if they are really away for another year or two, especially if Voldemort is left unattended, many unpredictable circumstances will arise. When Ino was furious with Voldemort. Far away in London, the Ministry of Magic was facing a similar problem. The minister's office, once always empty, was now bustling with people, not only the 7 directors of magic, but also several members of the Wizengamot. Fudge sat upright on the sofa, looking at his former colleagues. Although each of them looked worried, he knew how many were truly worried and how many were just pretending. "You've read the letter now. Now, what are your opinions?" Fudge asked calmly, looking around. He wouldn't make any decisions until the situation was clear, lest he follow in the footsteps of the previous minister. As Fudge finished speaking, Amelia, the head of the Department of Law Enforcement, decisively took over. "He's challenging the statute of secrecy. This isn't just an English issue. My opinion is to report this to the International Confederation of Wizards and pool all our resources." Before Amelia could finish her words, she was already spurred by a voice of objection. "That's not the way to say it. The werewolf attacks have stopped, and they're not asking for the opening of the Department of Mysteries or for them to explore ruins in various countries under the ministry's guise. We can negotiate," said Tiberius Ogden, a member of the Wizengamot. In contrast to Amelia's advocacy for war, Ogden was a staunch advocate of peace. After all, the once mad Dark Lord had shown some rationality after his resurrection. Since he was rational, they could sit down and talk. There was no need for a life-and-death struggle. Ogden's words garnered some agreement. Almost everyone present held high positions. Confrontation had previously been a dead end, but now that détente was possible, no one was willing to risk their own safety. Talk? They're looking for something. Can't you see? You know better than anyone what the consequences will be if they can't find it. Emilia's tone tinged with anger. A group of timid people would only compromise. And Dumbledore. I think we can talk. After Emilia, the office once again descended into discussion. Fudge ignored the clamor, sitting on the sofa as if under a petrifying spell. In reality, these people had been brought in simply to share the pressure, not to truly assist in decision-making. The more heated the argument between the two factions, the safer he, as minister, would be. While the idea was a good one, it was clear there were many smarter minds here. Bagman, from the sports department, remained silent throughout, as if sound asleep. Many others shared his attitude. For a while, after realizing the argument was being driven back and forth by a specific few, the situation reached a stalemate. Everyone's attention once again turned to Fudge. Seeing no escape, the minister had no choice but to speak. I think it's a good thing the werewolves have stopped attacking. After all, the Muggle Prime Minister has already protested. As for the rest, we still need to consult Dumbledore. This irrelevant response and the minister's tactful approach left many speechless. But Fudge's tacit acceptance also infuriated many. Just wait and see. Do nothing. Just force another Dark Lord out, and you'll be satisfied. Amelia stood up and walked out of the office without a backward glance. She felt sick to be in the same room with these people. They left, but Amelia's words had startled many. In truth, Fudge and no one else seemed to have considered Swinburne's position from the beginning, simply subconsciously assuming he would side with Dumbledore. They had never imagined the other side would do anything out of the ordinary. Just like the battle at Hogsmeade, they would respect the lives of innocent people and abide by the rules. But all of this was based on wishful thinking. If the other side didn't abide by the rules. At that moment, this small group of the top wizards in England simultaneously imagined the worst-case scenario. That's all for today. I have things to attend to. Fudge stood up, no longer concerned with sharing responsibilities. The most important thing now was to sound out the situation. Compared to the confrontation 15 years ago, the current situation between the three of them truly made him feel complicated. There were too many variables involved. Chapter 386. The first guest of the tavern, an old friend, comes to visit. Unlike the Ministry of Magic, who had their own agenda, Ino washed up quickly and was already on his way to potions class. Now that he was back at school, he had to abide by certain rules. Sixth-year potions had become an elective. Especially after the OWL exams, if one wasn't determined to get the final exam certificate, attending potions class wouldn't matter. Returning to the potions classroom after a year and a half, Ino noticed that the number of students had unknowingly decreased by more than half. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Snape, dressed in a black robe, appeared outside the classroom on time. Although Snape's tone and demeanor seemed largely unchanged, there was a slight incongruity. Ino had speculated about this before the start of the school year. To develop a potion to counter Horcruxes, one would inevitably need to use Horcruxes as a reference. And since Voldemort's Horcruxes had long been collected by Dumbledore, there was only one way to research them, to create a Horcrux. It was originally a personal choice, and he had no intention of interfering. However, there was something off about Snape today. Time passed slowly, and the 1-hour potions class quickly drew to a close. After class, Ino didn't get up, but sat waiting. As the last student left, the classroom fell silent again. Professor. Something's wrong with you, Ino said calmly, stepping forward. I know. But this isn't the place to chat? Snape didn't deny it, but instead picked up his books and slowly walked out of the classroom. Seeing this, Ino said nothing more and followed him. In the potions office beneath the castle. I created a Horcrux. There's nothing to hide about that. Dumbledore knew about it, but he pretended not to know. The dim light blurred Snape's features. Actually, you don't have to worry about me. I've already destroyed the Horcrux. It's inevitable that it will be weakened for a while. In the office, Snape spoke without hiding anything. A long while passed. Some things aren't right or wrong, they're just choices. Ino expressed his opinion calmly, feeling a sense of relief. The weakness from the destruction of his Horcrux wasn't a big deal, he was only afraid of other unexpected events. Alright, Professor. I respect your choice, but I'd like to know how much longer Harry needs. At the same moment, as Ino finished speaking, a strange glint flashed in Snape's eyes. 3 months is enough. In fact, he came to me yesterday after you talked. Snape unhesitatingly explained Dumbledore's behavior. Okay. With the answer, Ino said nothing more. He had originally intended to visit to check on Snape and confirm Harry's time. With both goals achieved, there was no reason to stay any longer. Now, all he had to do was wait quietly for a few months. With Ino's departure, the potions office fell silent again. Snape's features blurred again in the candlelight on the wall. Time slipped by unnoticed. A week flew by. Inside the castle, the excitement surrounding Hermione's resurrection cooled with time. Unlike adult wizards, the separation of life and death still seemed distant to students. It was Saturday morning. Blue Lantern, make some more pumpkin juice and butterbeer. In the Valley Tavern, Hermione stood at the bar, meticulously wiping glasses while directing Blue Lantern to make various items. Compared to Hermione's busy schedule, Ino seemed somewhat relaxed, quietly sitting alone in his glass, savoring his freshly brewed herbal juice. After a while, 2 round wooden barrels appeared behind the bar, and Hermione decisively declared, "Ready. Ino, we're open." Okay. Ino stood up and closed the tavern door. At the same moment, as the door closed, a mysterious atmosphere took over the tavern, as if time had stood still and everything slowed down. After an unknown amount of time, strange noises began to fill the tavern, the sound of wind, waves, and even the faintest hint of an ethereal, beautiful song. In this atmosphere, Hermione instinctively flinched. "Don't be afraid, we're just running the tavern." Ino reassured her with a chuckle from his seat. "I'm not scared, I just find it magical." Hermione defiantly puffed out her chest. Just as Hermione finished speaking, a conversation erupted outside the tavern. "I don't think opening a tavern in the forest is worth the risk, especially at night. But we have no choice now. We have to keep going, and who knows how long it will take to get out of here." The voices sounded like 2 young men speaking. Yet, Ino felt a tinge of familiarity, as if he had heard it somewhere before. "Jacob. We're adventurous, but not reckless," one of the more composed voices echoed. Hearing the familiar name again, Ino stood up instantly. Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm. Outside the door were the Grimm brothers, who had once adventured together. "Do you know them?" Hermione asked curiously from inside the bar. She had rarely seen Ino so excited. "Yes, I do." Ino nodded without hesitation. "Those 3 oak trees in the valley were given to me by them." Meeting old friends again after such a long time was a pleasant surprise. But listening to the conversation outside, Ino felt a sense of helplessness. His tavern was merely a passive hospitality, open only when someone knocked. Otherwise, opening the door proactively would be a disguised refusal of hospitality. But right now, the 2 brothers seemed undecided, which made him anxious. After a while, Jacob's voice rang out again from outside, "Whatever you want, I'm not afraid anyway." At the same time, there was a crisp knock on the door. "Come on in. Do you know how long I've been waiting for you 2 to knock?" Ino quickly opened the door and looked out with joy, seeing 2 familiar faces. William, wearing thick glasses and looking mature, and Jacob, with a lively and energetic face, stood behind them, a dark and mysterious forest. Meanwhile, after Ino finished speaking, the Grimm brothers stopped talking. Jacob, despite his outgoing nature, was not rash. He carefully examined the somewhat unfamiliar young man before him, then asked uncertainly, "Are you?" "Ino." "What else?" Ino replied with a smile. "William took the liberty of writing me into his story, and I didn't even charge him for it." He understood Jacob's caution. After all, so much time had passed, and his appearance and height had changed. It was normal for him not to recognize him at first. Outside, despite Ino's explanation, Jacob didn't immediately go to the tavern. The usually brave man now seemed hesitant. Instead, William, usually calm, stepped into the tavern immediately. "Glad to see you, my friend." William opened his arms. "Me too." Ino also hugged his long-lost friend. After confirming it was a genuine old friend, Jacob immediately made his presence known. "And me. Back in Merchant Town, I worked so hard to take care of you when you were injured. Ha, I can't forget. That's why I'll treat you to some drinks and some candy. Plenty of it this time." Releasing William, Ino looked at Jacob with equal enthusiasm. However, his eyes inadvertently glanced at the dark forest outside the door. For a moment, he felt a prying eye and malicious intent. "I've written 3 times today, Captain Duncan of the Lost Homeland, Simba the Lion King. I've cut and chopped a few parts, so I've wasted time. Sorry." Chapter 387 Jacob Green's Choice. Inside the tavern. The moment Jacob entered, the dark forest outside suddenly vanished, replaced by a vibrant valley. Even the sky shifted from night to day. "Oh my God. This is simply..." The perceptive Jacob immediately noticed the difference in the environment and light. Although curious, he remained motionless, as if rooted to a tree, clinging to the door frame to peer out. "Ino. You can go out and look. Don't worry. It's safe here." Ino extended a hand and gently pointed toward the valley. At the same time, Hermione quietly walked out of the bar. "I'm sorry. Although it's rude, can I interrupt? I want to ask, is your last name Green?" Hermione looked at the 2 men with some anticipation. In fact, after hearing Jacob and William's names just now, she had a certain guess. Although they didn't have surnames, these 2 names were household names, especially judging by their facial features. They were brothers. "Of course. Our last name is Grimm, so you can call us the Grimm brothers." William didn't find it amiss. In fact, the brothers had become quite famous over the years, so being recognized wasn't surprising. "Oh my God, it's really a Grimm fairy tale!" Hermione exclaimed, covering her mouth in amazement. The Grimm brothers, Hans Andersen. She seemed to have seen all these childhood idols, something she hadn't dared to imagine as a child. Fairy tales. William glanced at Ino in surprise, as if wondering what he was talking about, but then calmly replied, "Yes. Fairy tales, simple and beautiful stories." Although William didn't object, the attentive Hermione noticed something strange, and after a moment's thought, she understood the key. It seemed that the earliest Grimm stories weren't fairy tales at all, but had been edited and revised countless times, becoming children's books. Realizing she had spoken in haste, Hermione abandoned the previous topic and walked to the bar, pulled out a few empty glasses, and began pouring butterbeer. 6-petaled tulips hung high in the sky, casting a soft glow of sunlight. Light filtered through the tavern's quaint window lattices, illuminating the rosewood tables. The brown wood grain, shimmering in the light and shadow, evoked a subtle nostalgic hue. The first floor hall was filled with the aroma of wine, wood, and a unique lingering fragrance. This aroma flowed gently, unhurriedly. "So, this is your story." William lifted his glass, downing the less than a third of the butterbeer remaining. "You could say that." Ino nodded slightly in agreement. The valley had undergone significant changes this time. Afterward, he had Blue Lantern survey the valley, starting from the tavern and measuring its depth in all directions. The total area was nearly the size of the entire Scottish Highlands. Located in the northwest of the British Isles, bordered by the North Sea to the east and the Atlantic Ocean to the west, the entire region encompasses nearly 70,000 square kilometers. By comparison, the entire British Isles, including overseas territories, only cover 240,000 square kilometers. Therefore, a valley of over 70,000 square kilometers could truly be called a story. Its only flaw was its monotony. Beyond the central area, with its tavern, mill, sea of flowers, and herb fields, stretches out into the vast wasteland. Not even a single stone, let alone vegetation, lies on this wasteland, a desolate scene that resembles a reset world. Following William's lead, Ino reminisced about the changes in the valley. Elsewhere, after hearing the story, Jacob spoke thoughtfully, "This feels like a fairyland, but it's not perfect yet. My brother and I once visited an ancient wonderland. But it's wonderful. I wonder if my brother and I can come back again in the future." As Jacob finished speaking, not only William but even Hermione, who was listening in, turned their heads. Under the gaze of 3 pairs of eyes, Ino offered a relaxed smile. "No one can stop you from entering my story." In fact, the moment the Grimm brothers entered the tavern, Ino had sensed the underlying rules. These rules were similar to those of the former sanctuary. Those invited could enter the tavern and the valley at regular intervals. Unlike his previous experience with Hans, where entry to the valley was random and arbitrary, entry into the valley was controllable. "Here's to you." Ino snapped his fingers gently, and 2 lush green leaves detached themselves, fluttering into the tavern. "What is this?" William examined the leaf in his hand curiously. It felt like silk. "A pass. With it, you won't have to sleep outdoors. But you can only use it once a month, and you can stay here for a maximum of 7 days, Ino explained with a smile. He wasn't a true bard, so he didn't play the casual, random game of teacher haunts, and didn't hide the rules. 7 days a month, that's 85 days a year. Almost 3 months. Jacob exclaimed, the first to react. Then he could hear him muttering deliberately, then we can build a house. After all, staying in the tavern is always more expensive than drinking. Ha ha ha, sure. Ino laughed heartily, but then changed the subject, but you'll need to pay for the land. Of course. That's how it should be, William agreed. As they chatted, time seemed to flow. After finishing his small bucket of butterbeer, Jacob yawned. Though the valley was bright and sunny, the brothers had spent the previous day wandering through the Black Forest. After a few beers, the sudden relaxation left them feeling tired and sleepy. I'll take you to the guest rooms. We still have plenty of time, there's no rush. Seeing Jacob yawn, Ino recalled the long-missed word jet lag. He reached out and gently waved at the tulips in the sky, like a friendly greeting. In the blink of an eye, the sky shifted from morning to noon, then to dusk. As the light faded, the valley went from daylight to night. The tavern wasn't large, but the second floor held nearly 5 guest rooms. Aside from the one Hermione and Anna had slept in yesterday, which was closed to the public, the remaining rooms were more than enough for each of the Grimm brothers. After settling them both in, Ino slowly descended the stairs. What are you thinking about? I saw you had an idea just now. Now it's just the two of us, so just say whatever you want to say. After the breakthrough communication before, the last layer of barriers between them no longer existed. On the side, Hermione bit her lip lightly, thought for a moment and said, let's build a house in the valley too. I don't like the one in Hogsmeade. As mentioned before, there are no secrets in the castle. Hermione may know very well how the house in Hogsmeade came about. Putting himself in her shoes, Ino agreed without thinking. Okay. Let's build a house for us in the valley. Chapter 388 Thunder. Blocked Hogwarts. As the valley fell into darkness, Ino left a note on the bar table and left with Hermione, allowing the Grimm brothers to get some sleep. Horizontal ellipsis. After opening the tavern early in the morning and chatting and catching up, it was almost noon when they returned to their dormitories. This weekend, Ino planned to visit Hogsmeade in his spare time. Having decided to build a house in the valley, he needed some essentials. Furthermore, he planned to order some herbal seeds to revive the barren land. However, upon leaving the dormitories, the atmosphere in the common room gave Ino pause. It wasn't just eerie, but a bit too noisy. It was the weekend, and every student from 3rd year onward would visit Hogsmeade. Even if they didn't buy anything, they went for a change of scenery. In this respect, it was somewhat similar to a Muggle boarding school, though separated by a wall. The scenery outside was always more beautiful than the school itself. Even just standing outside and daydreaming, the air felt free. But today, Ino secretly looked around. Wow, the huge common room was almost crowded now. Ino, this way. Draco stood up and waved in a corner of the lounge. At the same time, Goyle consciously gave up his seat and stood aside silently. Hearing the call, Ino walked over and gave Goyle a kind smile. The latter rubbed his head honestly. What's going on? After sitting down, Ino asked curiously. The current situation really made him a little confused. Something big happened. Draco said mysteriously, remember the news a few days ago? That potion master, what's his name? Damocles Belby. Seeing that Draco couldn't say the name, Ino decisively answered for him. Yes. That's him. Draco nodded emphatically, then said with a look of amazement, the newspaper said he was missing, but it turns out he was abducted by werewolves. Draco must have been a storyteller, and through his cadence, Ino gradually understood the story. This morning, while he was entertaining the Grimm brothers, a werewolf raided the herbalist's shop in Diagon Alley, injuring several people and stealing a large quantity of herbs before the Ministry of Magic arrived. The brazen robbery and assault of wizards by werewolves was unprecedented in the wizarding world in centuries, and the shock it caused was unimaginable. And that wasn't the end of it. Afterward, the Aurors pursued the man, and while they didn't recover the lost herbs, they did capture several of the werewolves involved. The subsequent interrogation revealed a shocking revelation. The previously missing potions master Damocles Belby had also been abducted by werewolves and, under the Imperious curse, had been working day and night to create the Wolfsbane potion. Of course, this news wasn't all that shocking. What truly shocked England, and indeed the entire wizarding community, was the discovery that werewolves were converting muggles. Wolfsbane, also known as lycanthropy, is primarily transmitted through contact between saliva and blood. Werewolves uncontrollably transform into wolves on full moon nights. After transformation, they are distinct from ordinary wolves. For example, they can walk upright. However, this doesn't mean they continue to spread wolfsbane before or after the transformation. It requires a full moon, the werewolf's transformed wolf state, and contact with saliva and blood. Both conditions must be met for the bite to transform the victim into a werewolf. However, werewolves under a full moon are irrational. While a wizard might be able to protect themselves against a transformed werewolf, a muggle would have little chance of survival. This is why over 99% of existing werewolves are wizards. But things are different now. The recent revenge had brought the werewolves together, unleashing a formidable force. Perhaps out of concern for Voldemort, the Ministry of Magic's approach was ambiguous, opting for suppression and post-war relief rather than directing operatives to eradicate the werewolves. This conciliatory approach, coupled with the long-standing discrimination faced by werewolves, fueled their arrogance and fostered an unprecedented ambition to expand their numbers. Compared to the scarce and difficult-to-control wizards, werewolves focused their attention on the ubiquitous muggles. Thanks to the Statute of Secrecy, these transformed werewolves were easily persuaded, especially since many of these muggles were already struggling. This is particularly true of the werewolves' ingenuity. They chose muggles not just those with successful careers and happy lives, but rather those facing challenges, such as homelessness and drug addiction. A sufficient supply of wolf poison potion allowed the werewolves to maintain their sanity after transformation, while a sane werewolf could achieve a transformation that dealt only casualties. Pandora's box had been quietly opened. While muggle-transformed werewolves can't use magic like wizard werewolves, their formidable physiques and access to firearms make them fearless of any ordinary wizard. Just like the Diagon Alley attack, hundreds of werewolves, led by wizard werewolves, swept through the stationed Auror squad. This is truly a major event. It's said there are over 2,000 werewolves hiding in London alone, not to mention those in other regions and countries. Although Draco already knew the news, he was still shocked every time he recounted it. How many wizards are there in all England? And these werewolves are like goblins in their breeding season, with a significant number of new additions every day. Draco was shocked, and so was Ino. He could never have imagined the current situation would unfold like this without him paying attention. Yes, this is truly a major event, Ino repeated with the same sigh. One variable triggers countless others. The biggest variable in the werewolf situation is Voldemort. Concerned about the Dark Lord, the Ministry of Magic hasn't implemented a drastic crackdown. But it's too late now. The cycle has closed. Even if Voldemort were to emerge, he wouldn't be able to suppress the werewolves. Wizards might fear the Dark Lord, but muggles certainly don't. With their firearms and werewolf stamina, and the full moon's transformation bonus, Ino instantly sensed that the future wouldn't be peaceful. With Hogwarts now under lockdown, it was clear the Ministry of Magic couldn't contain the situation. As for the Muggle government, how much longer they could hold back was uncertain. Ino, what should we do? Draco whispered. But the moment he asked, he regretted asking in the common room. Even though his voice was low, the moment he finished, the entire common room fell silent. Everyone looked in their direction, or more accurately, at Ino. Slytherins might be paranoid, but they were rarely foolish. Even Goyle could probably guess how serious the situation was. Lying on the sofa, Ino looked at the worried, frightened eyes, feeling momentarily at a loss for a solution. He wasn't afraid of Voldemort, or even a single enemy, but facing a werewolf like the Resident Evil, he was truly helpless. Moreover, without transforming, these werewolves were hidden in the vast Muggle world, like a stone thrown into the ocean, impossible to find. He thought so, but he knew he had to say something. While there were only Slytherins here, these students represented a vast community of pure-blood and half-blood wizards. If possible, I suggest a move to Hogsmeade. Wizards are all together there, and since it's close to Hogwarts, they can all look out for each other. Ino addressed Draco, but even as he finished his words, many impatient Slytherins stood up, clearly ready to pass on the message. Within a quarter of an hour, Slytherins, clutching their owls, flocked out of the common room. After all, they couldn't fly them underground. Such a grand occasion naturally piqued the curiosity of the other three houses. After a series of inquiries and discussions, countless owls, including Owlman, flew out of the castle. Ziodes sharing today, werewolves. British Ministry of Magic classification level, XXXXX. Werewolves are widely discriminated against in the magical world. Compared to muggles, wizards are more likely to be attacked by werewolves because they often hunt or study these creatures. The British Ministry of Magic's policy on werewolves has always been confusing and inefficient, with its management fluctuating between the beasts and man-like departments of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. The Werewolf Registry and Werewolf Capture Unit were both located within the Beasts Department, but the ministry also established a werewolf support service within the man-like department, which was eventually closed due to lack of attendance. In 1637, the British Ministry of Magic established a set of werewolf regulations, requiring werewolves to sign a pledge not to attack anyone and to lock themselves up securely once a month. However, in reality, no one would admit to being a werewolf. The Werewolf Registry later faced similar problems. Many newly bitten werewolves conceal their condition to avoid discrimination, humiliation, and exile. In the latter half of the 20th century, several potions were invented to mitigate the effects of werewolf transformation, the most effective of which was Wolfsbane Potion. Chapter 389, Pig's Head Bar. That's how the wizarding world works. When owls begin to fly in large flocks, something big is bound to happen. That evening, in the last glimmer of light before sunset, the three broomsticks and even the Hogshead Inn enjoyed their moment in the spotlight. Dozens of wizards and witches, along with their families, descended on Hogsmeade, the wizarding community. This is insane. I've never seen anything like this. Aberforth grumbled as he stood at the door of the Hogshead. He ran the bar as a hobby. As for making money, the Dumbledore family vaults were more than enough to provide him with food and clothing. So, today's booming business had annoyed him, especially with the cunning-looking visitors, like the one before him. Sir, I reiterate, I only request a standard guest room. And I don't live here myself, only my wife. Lucius stood at the door of the Hogshead, a weary look on his face, but he held his wife, Narcissa, firmly by her hand. As one of the Sacred 28, Hogsmeade must have a Malfoy property, but at this point, he was worried about his wife living alone. Yes, living alone. Until everything was settled, Lucius had no intention of doing anything out of the ordinary or incompatible with his position, but he had to make arrangements for the safety of his family. The Hogshead was a good choice. With Dumbledore's brother in charge, even the most ordinary dark wizard wouldn't dare act rashly. In fact, as Hogsmeade's nearly transparent black market, the Hogshead had remained relatively unscathed for so many years, which was a telling sign. After Lucius's explanation, Aberforth's expression softened slightly. He disliked cunning and deceitful people, and even more so, those who would cause trouble. But the genuine affection between the man and his wife couldn't be deceived. A small room with a private bathroom, 4 sickles a day. Aberforth compromised, then turned and walked towards the grimy bar, pulling open a drawer and fumbling around as if searching for a key. Lucius, meanwhile, breathed a sigh of relief, but Narcissa said, somewhat melancholy, my dear, why do we have to do this? You know what I'm trying to say. The force of his palm made Lucius feel his wife's nervousness. It doesn't have to be this way. This has to be this way. 15 years ago, we thought everything was stable, but then something unexpected happened. He paused mid-sentence, noting that Aberforth, already at the bar, had found his room key and was looking over at him from afar. Be good. Stay here for now, and we'll go home by Christmas. Lucius instructed calmly, but the word home only made Narcissa's grip, which was about to loosen, tighten even more. Life, separations and reunions, seemed to be a constant. When Lucius and his wife parted at Hogsmeade, the so-called powers that be at the Ministry of Magic, far away in London, gathered once again. But unlike before, while there had been arguments and activity, the atmosphere now was deathly still. You all know the situation already. Stop playing dumb. In the office, Fudge's tone was unusually firm. However, this seemingly tough attitude, upon closer inspection, revealed a complete lack of confidence. But no one cared about these matters now. The most powerful people in England's Ministry of Magic were filled with worry. If it weren't for the attack on Diagon Alley, they would have been kept in the dark. There were 2,000 werewolves hiding in London alone, And who knows how many more were in England. We can't run out of herbs. We even need to proactively prepare them and let them grab them. Bagman, the head of the Department of Magical Sports and Physical Education, broke the dead silence. Bagman understood the truth that when the nest is overturned, all the eggs will be broken. As Fudge had said, this was no longer a case of playing dumb. If things went wrong, it would be a disaster that would sweep across the entire wizarding world. As Bagman finished his words, his seemingly unconventional statement elicited silent nods of agreement from many. Full moon nights, based on the lunar cycle of 27.3 days, occur at least 13 times a year. Without sufficient wolfsbane potion, werewolves hidden in the Muggle world would lose their minds and transform, effectively rendering the entire statute of secrecy meaningless. Then, wizards would be openly exposed to Muggles. This was why, despite knowing that providing the herb would only increase the number of werewolves, many still supported it. It was like drinking poison to quench thirst. A slow delay was better than an immediate death. It was a poor solution, but for now, it was the only one. No one objected to Bagman's proposal, not even the usually assertive Amelia. The werewolf population was vast and a bit frightening, but the Department of Law Enforcement was no pushover. She knew full well that the root of this matter lay with Voldemort. If this delicate balance were disrupted, even double the number of werewolves wouldn't be a threat. After all, over 99% of those werewolves were Muggle transformed. Even if they were strong, their strength was limited, not even comparable to that of a full-grown mountain troll. With all the strikers and aurors out in force, the situation would be resolved with time. While the current situation was thorny, it was still manageable. The only thing that puzzled her was Dumbledore. The legendary White Wizard seemed to be selectively blind, not only taking no action, but even failing to contact the Ministry. Amelia wasn't the only one puzzled. Dumbledore's actions had many others puzzled. It was precisely this very nature that maintained a delicate balance within the wizarding world. Perhaps it was precisely this balance that led to Bagman's proposal gaining widespread support. Amidst the debate and confusion within the Ministry, Dumbledore, the hidden protagonist, was caught in a dilemma. On one side were the Muggles being transformed at every turn, and on the other, Harry, who desperately needed time. While most of these Muggles were homeless and drug addicts, life was life. The value of life could never be measured in quantity or quality. Abandoning Harry or ignoring the Muggles was neither of these options. Sev, is it true that the potion cannot be improved? Dumbledore asked calmly in the headmaster's office. The only solution before him was to rid Harry of the Horcrux as quickly as possible, only then would all his problems be resolved. However, all he got in return was a blank, cold stare from Snape. Unless you want him dead. Snape's tone and demeanor were utterly cold, as if even Harry's death wouldn't move him. But Dumbledore knew that this was a sign of Snape's anger. I'm sorry, Sev. But you know, the situation. If that's all. Snape interrupted Dumbledore, stood up, and walked out the door without a backward glance. Muggles were nothing to him, not to mention his childhood in Spinner's End, which had taught him the depths of these homeless, drug-addled people. Gazing at Snape's back, Dumbledore moved his lips, as if about to say something. But until Snape had completely left the headmaster's office, his words remained unspoken. Chapter 390 Trelawney's Prophecy. Time, like the most powerful magic, can inadvertently change everything. A week had passed since the attack on Diagon Alley. Despite the initial panic, the wizarding world gradually calmed down after the werewolves stopped making any further moves. This seemed to confirm the saying that human memories are always short. But this only applied to ordinary wizards. The wiser ones sensed danger and either kept a low profile or left for other places. Suddenly, with the exception of Hogsmeade, the entire English wizarding world fell into a state of depression. However, the gloom outside of Hogwarts didn't reach Hogwarts. With students banned from leaving their homes on weekends, the castle became even more bustling. In the common rooms, the Great Hall, and even the corridors, groups of students could be seen gathered together, each with a mysterious expression, as if hiding some devastating secret. This atmosphere gave the ever-thriving Little Lions a true revelry every weekend. The Gryffindor common room. With the graduation of George and Fred, while the pranks and jokes had decreased, a new generation of Wheel Eyes had taken over. Ron sat on the sofa, not pontificating on current affairs as he used to, but his ears were perked up. To others, these might just be topics of conversation, but to him, they were all crisp galleons. As for not talking anymore, that was simple. These people were just listening to the news he told them, and he wouldn't do anything that would lose him money. Besides, he was a prefect now, and he had to act like one. After a while, as the topic of conversation in the common room ended, Ron stood up during a brief pause and walked to a relatively quiet corner. "Harry, are you alright? If not, I'd say you should go back to your dorms or check with Madame Pomfrey." In the corner, Harry sat quietly on the sofa, looking increasingly listless. Not only did his mind wander, but he also struggled to muster the energy. "I'm fine. I haven't congratulated you yet. You should have made a lot of money today." Harry forced himself to cheer up. As one of the few people who knew about Ron's part-time job, he was happy to see his friend earn some pocket money. "Oh. What's the point? It's just outdated stuff anyway." Ron sighed softly. Primary resources are becoming increasingly difficult to come by these days. Unless someone can't help but confide in someone, most people know how to use them to make money. The Hogwarts Stories magazine office outside the castle is open at a fixed time every day, welcoming everyone and everything. Seeing the magazine's sales soaring since the school closed, for a moment, he really thought about dropping out next year and heading up the off-campus branch. But some things are just thoughts. Thinking of his furious mother, Ron shuddered subconsciously. While Harry couldn't understand his friend's thoughts, he could hear the resignation in Ron's tone. After a moment's thought, Harry lowered his voice and said, "I have an exclusive tip for you. It's a prophecy. I ran into Trelawney in the corridor last night." The bustle of the Gryffindor common room was just a microcosm of the castle's bustle. Young wizards with nothing to do always need some way to vent their energy, and Quidditch used to be the go-to. But with no house cup in the first half of the year, and no leaving the castle, small talk became the only way to relieve boredom. While the others chatted, Ino quietly sipped herbal juice in the valley. "I don't know what adventures you're on, but as a friend, if you need any of these, feel free to ask," Ino said with a smile in the tavern. On the table before him lay rows of exquisite weapons, daggers, crossbows, daggers. A week had passed in a trance, and today was the day the Grimm brothers left. "As much as I'd like them, we're out of money," Jacob said with a hint of regret, seeing the weapons on the table. No. "This is my reward for your commission," Ino said, pulling out a long-prepared umbrella flower seed from his pocket. "If you have time, help me plant it when you get back. Don't worry about anything else." Although a week had passed, he hadn't forgotten his earlier conjecture. Now was the perfect time to test it with the help of the Grimm brothers. If it proved true, he could then fully explore this magical story. As for the weapons on the table, they were simply extras to satisfy the terms of the exchange. If the Grimm brothers truly needed these weapons to escape danger, the story world would have collapsed long ago. "All right. Leave it to me," said the elder brother, William. After accepting the seed, he looked at the weapons on the table with interest. Ino wasn't surprised by William's behavior. Of these legendary brothers, the only thing he couldn't understand was William. "Then I'll choose the weapon." Seeing the agreement was reached, Jacob, though his tone questioned, didn't slow down his movements. He decisively picked up the foot-long crossbow on the table. Ino quietly watched the two brothers as they selected items. The items on the table were all casually crafted in his spare time. While they might be considered refined, they weren't quite as powerful. 10 minutes later, the two brothers, fully armed, stood outside the tavern. Jacob, in particular, looked eager to test out his new weapon. "Once we complete this mission, we'll have enough money to buy land, my lord," Jacob said, half-jokingly. "All right. I'll wait for you then. Good luck." Ino raised his arm and personally opened the door for the two brothers. Outside, the once vibrant valley suddenly transformed into pitch black, menacing forest. "Time hasn't changed," Ino exclaimed, the scene before him seeming to demonstrate the difference in the speed of time on both sides. But before he could even consider it, the Grimm brothers crossed the threshold, and the dark forest vanished like faded film. At the same time, in the Gryffindor dormitory on the 8th floor of the castle, Harry quietly finished his prophecy. To be honest, he'd never taken the crazy Trelawney seriously. It was only after hearing Ron complain today that he remembered the prophecy. In the colorful sky, the source of darkness will be transformed into a rain of candy, pouring down from the sky. Anyone who picks up a candy will be happy all day. Ron muttered to himself, feeling the same way Harry did. It was a far-fetched and ridiculous prophecy, Probably another one of Trelawney's tricks to attract attention. Even if it was a first-hand source, it wouldn't fetch more than 2 nights if sent to the magazine. But there was one thing both Ron and Harry had misjudged: the information they thought was top secret had already been known. Although it had only happened yesterday, there were no secrets in the castle. Meanwhile, in the tavern, after seeing off the Grimm brothers, Ino went alone to the valley. He strolled aimlessly, enjoying the fresh air and the long-lost tranquility. After walking for a few minutes, he stopped. Before him were the same 3 lush green oak trees, but one of them was emitting a faint silvery glow. Although I know the New Year's Harvest Festival is just around the corner, this time the gifts seem a little different. Meow. I wish everyone a happy weekend. Happy every day. Chapter 391: The Non-Existent Harvest Goddess. In ancient legends, the oak tree holds many symbols: mystery, authority, power, holiness, longevity. Legend has it that Zeus, the chief Greek god, reigned over it. It was said that within Zeus's temple stood a towering oak tree imbued with divine power. The rustling of its leaves was considered by the Greeks to be a sign from Zeus. Among the ancient Druids, the oak tree was considered a supreme symbol and held a sacred status. Druid priests would gather mistletoe from oak trees at specific times, believing it to possess a panacea. In the valley, Ino stood before 3 oak trees, examining the unusual gifts. An indecipherable robe and 2 walking sticks accompanied it. A miniature well hung from another tree, along with, of course, the everlasting supply of glittering gems and gold coins. He easily understood the latter 2 gifts, but the robe and walking stick, shrouded in a silvery glow, were the only things that eluded him. With such visuals, to call them ordinary would be a joke. But the gift hadn't matured yet, so no matter how curious he was, it was useless. Looking at the gift before him, Ino couldn't help but think of William's words from a few days ago: "There's no goddess of harvest in your story. Whether it sprouts, even gives gifts, depends entirely on you. And the stories you can see are only those illuminated by the lamp in your hand." To be honest, William's metaphorical explanation was truly convincing. In fact, upon closer inspection, neither the former sanctuary nor the current valley had ever experienced an invasion, not even by the once furious Poseidon. The magic of making your wishes come true. Looking back, Ino found the answer he was looking for in details he had previously ignored. The seeds germinated with the help of a patroness charm outside the castle. The first gift of gems and gold coins, his wandering experiences, subconsciously instilled in him the belief that wealth brings security. And then there were the crystal ball, the blue lamp, and the red mill. I want to control my destiny. I want a loyal, unrebellious house elf. I want a self-sufficient valley with delicious food. A sigh echoed beneath the oak trees. Quietly gazing at the 3 oaks, Ino suddenly felt everything was magical and magical. It seemed bizarre and absurd, but in reality, it made perfect sense. It was like another room of requirement, only with a longer term and exclusive access. A piece of clothing, logically, it should be the moon. Ino shook his head in confusion. Compared to a magical piece of clothing, he desired a bright, clear moon even more. Otherwise, the valley at night always felt like something was missing. Time passed. In contrast to the tranquility of the valley, the herbology greenhouse at the same time was a bit bustling. Of course, this wasn't due to an overcrowding of students, but rather the release of the new issue of Once Upon a Time at Hogwarts. At just 7 nuts, its low price and engaging content made it a rising star in the magazine world. Abandoned Greenhouse number 12. Or perhaps it's also known as the headquarters of Hogwarts Stories magazine. Outside, the air was filled with a faint scent of ink and grass. Dozens, even hundreds, of magazines, neatly bundled and arranged, lay quietly, like fragments of time. Ron, 130 issues of Diagon Alley, including 45 for the Videoscope. Here's the address. Never mind, let Hannah handle Diagon Alley, Colin said as he emerged from the room, a thick notebook in hand. Nearby, Hannah tossed her head indifferently at the mention of her name, her golden ponytail swaying freely. I don't mind, but the rules are the same, no fee. I want a hardcover edition. Don't worry, you'll pay for it. Hannah spread her hands and looked at Colin expectantly. She didn't really care about the money, but collecting every hardcover issue had become an obsession, as fun as collecting chocolate frogs. Yes, you can get priority purchase. That's what we promised you, but the old rules apply, 1 cappy per person. Colin nodded slightly, then glanced at Ron, seemingly waiting for his choice. Seeing Hannah's open-minded attitude, Ron curled his lips in envy. If only he could. Owning a limited edition hardcover magazine not only comes with a 5-inch camera, but also comes with a random signed photo and a handwritten quote from the person. These photos might be of a professor or a famous student, the key is a random one. Therefore, even at 15 galleons per copy, demand still outstrips supply. This particular issue, a collector's edition of 25 copies, reportedly features the first signed photo of Dumbledore and Swinburne together. The news had been accidentally leaked, making this issue a hit before it even launched. Thinking of this, Ron hesitantly lowered his head, his heart in a state of internal conflict. He knew that if he got his hands on the photo, he could sell it for a fortune in a matter of minutes, but the reality was, even as a magazine employee, it was impossible to know which issue the photo was in. Perhaps only Malfoy and Colin knew, but one of them didn't care about money, and the other had a strong professional ethics. If it was random, it meant it was random. A 1 in 25 chance, and he was betting 15 galleons. After a long hesitation, Ron chose silence. Real life was weighing on him, and he couldn't afford the gamble. A steady salary was more secure than relying on luck. Besides, he had so many expenses these days. Just going to Madame Puddifoot's tea house with Ollivander each week was a significant expense. Not to mention the prefect's dignity. "Colin, I still want my salary," Ron said, seemingly exhausting all his energy, not noticing Hannah winking at him. "You're such a fool. 20 galleons, sell me your spot." Seeing the spot about to be gone, Hannah couldn't care less and immediately offered the high price of 20 galleons. Ron looked up in surprise. He knew Hannah came from a wealthy family, but this was the first time he knew the leaky cauldron was so profitable. 2 magazines, including the premium, totaled 35 galleons. Honestly, that was a lot of money, equivalent to half a month's salary for the average employee at the Ministry of Magic. Still hesitating? "This is the final price." Ron's silence left Hannah feeling dissatisfied. "No. That's the price. I'm just stunned, I don't mean anything else." Seeing her angry, Ron quickly made his position clear. As deputy editor-in-chief, Colin pretended not to see the exchange between the two. He was sticking to his bottom line, but he wasn't being unkind. Reasonable operations within the rules were completely acceptable. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 392 Gift, Gringotts Robe and Umbrella. In the Slytherin dormitories. Is this another reprint? Ino casually took the magazine Draco handed over. It can't be helped. We're not allowed to leave the campus now. There are too many people who need something to talk about. Draco had a faint smile on his face. The idea that had once flashed in his mind had finally come to fruition. Nothing could be happier than that. Great. Ino felt a joy and flipped open the magazine. Although someone who rarely participated in conversation, this magazine greatly satisfied his exploration of castle life. Campus life seemed to be the same regardless of location. Perhaps youth is not just about sadness, but more about laughter and passion. Flipping through the various interesting stories in the magazine, Ino's attention was caught by an inconspicuous article title at the end of the last third. The collection of Trelawney's prophecies. Logically, this title was problematic. After all, campus magazines rarely mention professors unless necessary, let alone name them. Professor McGonagall had once stated this, but Trelawney was an exception, as if she was inherently disliked. Of course, the upright Professor McGonagall never said it directly, her actions made her position clear. In the past, whenever a professor's name appeared in a magazine, she would receive a letter from Professor McGonagall the next day. But with Trelawney, no matter what she wrote, she never received a so-called warning letter. Despite his thoughts, Ino immediately read the article. It wasn't long, and within a few minutes, he understood the entire story. Draco, where did this news come from? Ino handed the magazine over. The contents made him wary. Perhaps others just saw it as a joke, but family members knew their own business. He really did have a rainbow sky. The radiant rainbow river over the valley seemed to have existed for eternity. Nearby, Draco, after seeing the magazine, also wore a thoughtful expression, trying his best to recall the past. It had been a joke at first, but after years of being together, he knew Ino would never ask a question without reason. A long pause. This should have been provided by Weasley. I didn't listen carefully at the time, but I still saw it when he was recounting it to Colin. Wait a moment. Draco said, then stood up and walked towards a nearby cabinet. He wasn't sure if he remembered correctly. After all, a monthly magazine contains so much information that it's impossible to know everything in detail. Ron. After receiving the answer, Ino pondered. Perhaps others would see Trelawney as a swindler, but he knew that this divination professor was the starter of the story. Without that leaked prophecy, there would be no Harry Potter story. Found it. It's Ron Weasley. September 16th, afternoon, 2 sickles. Draco repeated the contents as he reviewed the account. In fact, it shouldn't have been so troublesome. The few sickles and nuts weren't worth remembering, but Colin's words changed his mind. If you want this magazine to thrive after graduation, you have to keep track of every night spent. Not everyone is wealthy. Hearing the last sentence, Draco relented. The wee eyes immediately popped into his mind. While they were wealthy now, there was no guarantee there would be others like them in the future. Oh, right. According to Weasley, this was exclusive information. No one else knew except him and Potter, so he sold it for 2 sickles. After recounting the details, Draco closed the thick account book. Exclusive. Ino chuckled softly, saying nothing more. There were no secrets at Hogwarts. Unless someone was hiding in the bathroom or staying in the dormitories, there was always one more person involved in a secret conversation within the castle. If there were 3 people conversing, the portrait was the 4th. If there were 4, the portrait was the 5th. More or less, there was no escaping these ubiquitous portraits. Ino, do you think I was deceived by Weasley? Draco heard the underlying meaning. Lie? Not really. Technically, he has first-hand information, Ino explained with a smile, not intending to reveal the secret. As long as he doesn't lie to me. Draco shrugged nonchalantly. The amount of money didn't matter, but honesty was essential. As Draco sighed, Ino picked up his unfinished magazine again. The details of school life were quite fascinating to savor. Meanwhile, the new issue of Hogwarts Once Upon a Time left the castle, accompanied by the owl's fluttering wings. These faithful messengers flew off to Hogsmeade, Diagon Alley, or elsewhere. Time passed. With the werewolves gradually becoming docile, in the last week of September, under internal pressure, the castle lifted its previous lockdown, restoring the students' right to visit Hogsmeade on weekends. However, there was an additional restriction: only those in their 5th year and above, with a guardian's signature of authorization, were allowed to leave. Despite the numerous restrictions, the anxiety caused by the lockdown instantly dissipated. It was like the prefect system at Hogwarts: as long as the 5th, 6th, and 7th years behaved, the remaining wizards wouldn't cause any trouble. It was the last weekend of September. Filch had been stationed at the entrance to Hogsmeade since dawn. After nearly a month of lockdown, many were eager to leave the castle, but now they had to suppress their temper and wait for a Filch's inspection and release. Of course, this wasn't due to Filch's increased prestige, but rather the presence of someone at his side. With a scarred face and a spinning, demonic eye, and mad-eye moody guarding the area, even the 7th-year graduates didn't dare to get upset. Everyone lined up in an orderly manner in the long queue. Since it was the first day of the lockdown, over 99.9% of the eligible students chose to leave. As for the remaining 0.1%, they were probably genuinely uninterested. As the only 6th-year student stationed in the castle, Ino washed up early in the morning and headed to the valley. The last weekend of September was also the traditional harvest festival. In the valley, as time passed, Ino finally saw the gift, previously shrouded in a hazy halo. The robe had a retro style, like a work of art from a bygone era, its overall color a deep navy blue, a color that, despite the passage of time, retains its calmness and elegance. Hanging beside the robe were not the canes he'd assumed they were, but 2 intricately crafted umbrellas. One was painted with a variety of colorful patterns, while the other was a pitch-black inky black. The story of the Oneroi. Initially, Ino hadn't been particularly impressed by the robe, but with the appearance of the 2 recognizable umbrellas, the answer was clear: the famous fairy tale, the Oneroi. Similarly, he understood why the moon, which he had longed for, hadn't appeared this time. With the Oneroi robe and umbrellas, what need was there for the moon and stars? While in the story, They could only alter dreams. In a world already steeped in magic, he was truly excited to see what umbrellas could accomplish. Thinking of this, Ino looked up at the sky, then his gaze shifted to the countless gems hanging from the branches, dazzling and radiant with color. Perhaps there was nothing more interesting than gems adorning the night sky. I wish you all a happy weekend, and be happy all day long. Chapter 393 Stars and Moon. Ole Lukoi. Gazing at the gifts hanging from the oak tree, Ino softly recited the name of the dream god from the story, Ole Luki. Ole was a common name, representing countless ordinary people, while Luki, a contraction of luck and see, meant to close one's eyes. Dream god, renowned for his storytelling, could bring beautiful dreams to children as they fell asleep. As Ino finished his words, the 3 gifts hanging from the branches fell away. The robes slowly flew to his side, then, like a flicker of light, covered the original robes. The standard Slytherin robes remained unchanged, yet they took on a more noble and mysterious air. Unlike the first Goblet of Fire match, where the clothes merely displayed texture, anyone with eyes could see the difference in Ino's robes this time. Of course, even Madame Malkin from Diagon Alley wouldn't have noticed the difference. The robes of the God of Sleep were truly like light and shadow, seemingly intangible, yet transforming the garment's form. Meanwhile, 2 vintage umbrellas of distinct styles merged together. The ribs changed from smooth, solid wood to the same rugged elderberry material as the ones. This gave the umbrellas a heavier and more stable appearance. At 2 feet and 60 centimeters long, they felt like a gentleman's walking stick. The surface of the umbrellas was painted with colorful patterns: spring flowers, summer night stars, autumn moon, winter snow. The blend of colors created a dazzling, multicolored sky. However, the underside of the umbrellas, visible only after opening, seemed somewhat monotonous. This contrasting style, the interior a deep, inky blue, with a few simple lines, resembled a swirling black mist. The Shroud of Nightmares. Ino understood the umbrella's purpose the moment he received it. In the original story, the God of Dreams possessed 2 umbrellas. The colorful one brought magical dreams to well-behaved children, while the darker one obliterated the dreams of disobedient children. It likely lacked the power to conjure nightmares. Ino glanced down at the umbrella in his hand. Sweet dreams were possible, but the dark side looked as if a Boggart was hiding within. It seemed to exemplify the saying, where attention flows, energy flows. As soon as he thought of the Boggart, he felt shadows swirling beneath his feet. Soon, a wisp of black smoke merged with the umbrella, and the once dark blue fabric turned a murky black. Even faintly, he could make out the cursed mountain dwellers of Middle-earth, their rotting skeletons. This has truly become a nightmare. Standing beneath the oak tree, Ino sighed at the umbrella. With a Boggart's presence, dreams brought fear. Perhaps a full-blown nightmare had been born. Despite his sigh, a faint smile permeated his face. The valley seemed to have surprised him once again, because it reminded him of his conversation with Lupin. It seemed that from that moment on, he had deeply believed in the connection between Boggarts and nightmares, but later, distracted by many matters, he gradually forgot this idea. Now, it seemed as if the seeds planted before had sprouted new branches. In a moment, the night gently opened its eyes. The interweaving of light and darkness gave birth to infinity. The hand of creation painted dreams on the traceless horizon. Ino picked up the unusual umbrella with colorful patterns and waved it gently, as if touching the most mysterious mechanism in the world. In an instant, the bright light of day was gently covered by the deep night. Under the shroud of night, the 6-petaled tulip sun quietly disappeared, and the colorful rivers in the sky merged with the inky black. The vast valley once again became a single color. But then, as if summoned, the colorful gems hanging from the oak branches took off into the sky, along with the gems produced in previous years. Although it was dark, the dazzling gems seemed to have their own light. Glowing with a myriad of colors, moonstones, aquamarine topaz, vibrant pigeon's blood rubies, deep cornflower sapphires, and emerald green garnet savorites, like a dazzling river of stars, they stretched far into the night sky. In the inky black sky, these stars, transformed from gemstones, rapidly arranged themselves into wondrous patterns, some like the pouring Milky Way, others like the rotating constellations, adorning the entire night sky with a dreamlike quality. Ino gazed up at this sudden feast of stars. Though he had created them himself, he marveled at the unimaginable beauty, as if transported to a dreamlike fairy tale. The night sky was a web of stars, dotted with stars. The bright moon rises from the darkness, casting its silver light, softening the edge of night. She is the queen of the night, the guide of dreams, soothing the loneliness of the world with her gentle light. From the valley, a poetic recitation echoed. The crystal ball slowly ascended, rising higher and higher, growing brighter and brighter. Rays of cold, brilliant light illuminated the entire valley. Over 70,000 square kilometers of land were instantly draped in a silver veil. But at the side of the barren wasteland in the distance, Ino frowned slightly. Horizontal ellipsis. After the song of the stars and the ode to the moon, the valley's darkness ushered in a new rhythm. The song of the mountains, the murmur of the river, the whisper of the forest. An unknown amount of time passed before Ino slowly lowered his umbrella. The entire valley had been completely transformed, as if it had experienced a chapter of creation, brimming with life. As the creator, he knew all this was thanks to the Oniro umbrella, but he couldn't deny the contribution of another gift. The well, once only a few inches across, like an upside-down teacup, had now expanded countless times, becoming a wellhead 3 feet in diameter, firmly planted on the ground. The valley now had a source of water. While magic could create pure water, it was ultimately like a rootless duckweed. Now that there is a water source, there is a real river. The winding water nourishes all things. It is an endless force. Ino stood quietly on the soft soil, with a dreamy night sky above his head. He used to tell stories carefully, but now he has his own story. After many years, scenes of the past emerged. Are you still in a daze? Ino turned around and looked. Behind him was Hermione with a shocked face. In fact, he knew about Hermione's existence a long time ago, but he had no time to be distracted at that time. It's probably like a painter who always wants to finish the painting when inspiration strikes. As Ino finished speaking, Hermione woke up from her dream. Oh my god. This is simply. As if she was surprised, Hermione couldn't think of a suitable word to describe it for a long time. A fairy tale that makes your wish come true. Ino took over the topic. Yes. Make your wish come true. Hermione nodded in agreement and added, just like a fairy tale. Chapter 394, The First Dream Weaving. In a tranquil valley, Ino leaned against an oak tree, a square white linen cloth spread before her. Atop the linen cloth lay a variety of sealed paper bags, at least a dozen in total. Each bag bore a unique label: wormwood, daisy, airship plum, hellebore, two-eared grass, guardian tree, whomping willow, biting sugar cane. Herb prices are skyrocketing right now. If it weren't for Professor Snape's introduction, I wouldn't have been able to buy these seeds. Hermione sat cross-legged on the ground, arranging the bags of seeds like building blocks. Prices are skyrocketing. Ino was momentarily taken aback, but then she realized the reason and said, it's probably because of the werewolves. If this continues, something bad will happen sooner or later. Who says not? Hermione nodded with deep feeling. Her trip to Hogsmeade to buy these seeds today, and everything she saw and heard along the way, gave her a sense of the calm before the storm. Perhaps because the topic was a bit heavy, they both fell silent. Ino leaned against the tree trunk, still thinking about the Ole God's umbrella. The feeling after using it today made him feel like he was unleashing a transformation. And this was not just an ordinary transformation, the umbrella was more like an amplifier, making the thoughts in his mind come true. It sounds powerful, but in fact, it is more effective in dreams. The valley, perhaps because of its special nature, or for some other reason, allows him to make his wishes come true. However, it is unknown what effect the umbrella will have after he actually walks out of the valley. But no matter what, he always has to experiment, including in his own dreams. On the other side, although Hermione also remained quiet, she always seemed to be worried. She thought about more, not only the situation after the statute of secrecy was broken, but also the safety of her parents in London. From time to time, a trace of confusion flashed in her beautiful brown eyes. For a long while, Hermione spoke softly, almost to herself, almost in confusion. Is wolfsbane truly incurable? What do you think? Hearing this, Ino smiled and took up the conversation. If 10 years ago, someone told you there was magic in this world, what would you have thought? If before today, someone had told you that magic could create the moon, the stars, the mountains, the rivers. Hearing the gentle words, Hermione's eyes gradually focused again, their gaze fixed on the herb seeds before her. Wolfsbane can be cured? It absolutely can. Just like I can bring the dead back to life, Hermione said firmly, her expression no longer wavering from her previous confusion. At the same time, Ino suddenly felt a surge of magical energy. He had seen this happen before. It was a magical gift bestowed upon a young wizard after they had made up their minds to a certain belief. Pansy had experienced it before, but now Hermione had caught the last train, receiving this gift before reaching adulthood. Since you have a goal, plant it. Ino stood up, picking up 2 packets of seeds. Time slipped by unnoticed. On the last weekend of September, as the sun slowly sank, the horizon gradually took on the hues of dusk. Filch and Moody once again stood guard at the entrance to the castle. But the difference was that Filch was keen on checking students' bags, while Moody was more concerned with their well-being. He ignored those who looked evasive, instead focusing on those who appeared vacant or absent-minded. Having accepted Dumbledore's request to join Hogwarts, he had expected it to be dull and tedious. But as time went on, Moody grew to love the work, especially the interrogations, which brought him back to the feeling of being an Auror. As the last student returned, Moody slowly closed the gate to Hogsmeade. In the night, he slowly gazed towards the castle nearby. The windows, shimmering with warm light, shimmered like stars in the darkness. Thank you for the candy, Draco. In his dorm room, Ino opened a brown paper bag emblazoned with Honeydukes and pulled out the snow-white cream toffee. Don't be polite. Everyone out today is crazy. They're all acting like they're going to Hogsmeade for the first time. Draco sat in his chair, recounting his observations with disdain. Hogwarts had only been locked down for less than a month, but the people out today seemed like they'd never seen the world before. They seemed interested in everything, and they were buying everything out of revenge. Stores like Honeydukes were particularly popular. He'd waited in line for an hour just for a small bag of candy. Ha ha ha. Ino couldn't help but laugh at Draco's narration. It wasn't that anything was particularly funny, but Draco's expression, he looked like a bullied young wife. Just laugh. I won't bring you anything next time. The sudden laughter made Draco irritated. Haha, okay, I won't laugh anymore. Ino took a deep breath, suppressing his inner laughter. After all, there's always a limit to jokes. By the way, in return for the candy, how about I give you a sweet dream tonight? Give it to me? A sweet dream. Draco rubbed his ears, as if to confirm he'd heard correctly. He'd never heard of dreams being given as gifts. Yes, I'll give you a sweet dream. Ino nodded seriously. Meanwhile, Draco hesitated. The last time Ino had such an expression was a few years ago when he was being examined under a light. Don't worry. I won't hurt you, Ino said firmly, noticing his roommate's hesitation. He admitted this was an experiment, but at its core, it was still a sweet dream, a dream of wishful thinking. Okay then. What do you need me to do? Hearing this promise, Draco's hesitation faded, and he suddenly became interested. Wash up early, go to bed early, that's all. Ino spread his hands, indicating that no preparations were necessary. A bright moon hung in the sky. As the lights in the castle windows faded, Hogwarts fell into silence. The dormitories were pitch black. Ino leaned quietly on his bed. Though clad in cotton pajamas, a hazy glow shone over his body. If he had a mirror, he would have recognized himself as identical to some of the people in the Greek stories. Those people, back then, had possessed a similar radiance. It was a deep, introverted light, radiating from within. It wasn't noticeable during the day, but in the stillness of the night, it was easily discernible. However, Ino paid no attention. Hearing Draco's steady breathing, he gently opened his umbrella. At the same moment, a mysterious rhythm quietly emerged in the dormitory. Perhaps it was his first time dreaming, but Ino hadn't noticed. This rhythm wasn't confined to the dormitory. Like ripples in a pond, it slowly spread throughout the castle. The Slytherin and Hufflepuff dormitories underground were the first to be affected. Of course, the potions office, also located in the castle's basement, was also affected. The basement floor, the auditorium, the second and third floors of the castle. As time passed, this magical rhythm slowly enveloped the entire castle. On the 8th floor, the principal's office. The moment he felt this rhythm, Dumbledore suddenly opened his eyes, his azure eyes like stars in the night sky. Soon, his sharp gaze gradually faded. The current situation reminded him of the prophecy Gellert had made a month ago. Thinking of this, Dumbledore closed his eyes again, a satisfied smile on his face. Time flies. The weekend passed in a trance. Well, Even if he has to go to work or school tomorrow, Zyodi wishes everyone a happy day. Chapter 395, Prophecy and Draco's Dream. When dreams envelope you, every ray of light is your heart's wish. When the curtains fall, you will no longer be a lonely star. Lying in bed, Dumbledore felt the gentle, soporific drowsiness that enveloped him, and Gellert's prophecy surfaced in his mind. It was precisely because of this prophecy that, after confirming Hermione Granger's resurrection, he chose not to inquire about Ino's affairs. The heart's wish, no longer alone. Dumbledore understood the weight of these two words better than anyone else. With this anticipation in mind, he gradually immersed himself in the rhythm. Simultaneously, as the umbrella opened, Ino vanished. This time, he did not return to the valley, but entered someone else's dream. Perhaps everything has its first time. From initial unfamiliarity to later familiarity and ease, Ino found himself in a dimly lit manor. Covered by darkness, he floated in midair, quietly observing the scene below. An inexplicable sense of familiarity washed over him, as if he had seen it somewhere before. But as a figure flashed past the window, the answer dawned on him. Draco, dressed in a respectable suit, stood in the room. Lucius and Narcissa sat on the sofa across from him. Beside him stood a woman, her face a blur, clutching an incredibly beautiful child. Yes, incredibly beautiful. With soft platinum blonde hair, large, watery sky blue eyes, and long eyelashes, she looked like a freshly made Barbie doll. "Is this my daughter?" Draco asked in disbelief. "What nonsense are you talking about? Don't you notice something's wrong here?" Lucius surveyed his surroundings with a cautious expression. He had only just gotten a light nap, yet somehow he had ended up in a manor. There, he found his wife and son. Remember, one of them was in Hogsmeade, the other in Hogwarts. It was impossible for them to suddenly appear. Even more bizarre, he had a granddaughter and a daughter-in-law whose face was blurred. As Lucius finished speaking, Narcissa decisively took over the conversation, teasing, rather than being curious about where this came from. "Aren't you curious about Draco's wife? Let me guess who she is." Narcissa sat on the sofa, her chin resting on one hand, observing the family of three with deep interest. The tenderness in her eyes seemed to take on a tangible quality. She didn't know why she couldn't help but think of her own birth. It seemed to be the same situation then: graduation, marriage, and then returning to the manor with a child. "All right. Draco, tell us who the child's mother is." Lucius's thoughts were diverted by his wife's words. To be honest, he was wary at first, but after observing them just now and catching a glimpse of a familiar figure against the night sky through the window, Lucius felt reassured. If this person really wanted to attack their family, there would be no need for such a fuss. Meanwhile, Draco, questioned by his parents, gradually emerged from his daze and regained consciousness. He also remembered what had happened before bed. Ino seemed to have promised him a sweet dream. Once he understood everything, Draco let go of the burden. Since it was just a dream, no one would remember it after waking. Gradually, Draco thought of a girl who had left a lasting impression on him. A thought always resonates. The woman, whose face had been blurry before, suddenly became clear. But as she appeared, a sharp voice rang out, "That's not the case. Too soon. Do it again." Some scholars have divided Hogwarts into different grades, believing that fourth year is generally a watershed. This is reflected not only in academics, but also in emotions and physical development. Excluding some precocious young wizards, the vast majority of young wizards choose love, or yearn for it, after fourth year. This year, Astoria Greengrass, entering fifth year, experienced the same fate. A magnificent palace, surrounded by vibrant roses. Astoria, wearing a crown and a pristine white evening gown, sat at the head of the table. She gradually grasped the rules of the place. It was like a dream come true, a dream all her own. A strange smile crossed her face as she thought of this. Then, a tall, slender man in Slytherin robes, his face blurred, appeared before her. Who could it be? The sight before her filled her with anticipation, especially the fluorescent green-trimmed robes, which instinctively reminded her of someone else. But unlike other girls, Astoria knew that something too good to be true wasn't always the best choice. However, as she pondered this, the man's blurry features gradually became clearer. Draco Malfoy. His signature hair color made Astoria recognize him instantly. He was holding a bouquet and a ring, seemingly proposing. She didn't dislike Malfoy much, and besides, the man before her was a rare talent, both in his family background and appearance. But after much hesitation, thinking about what was about to happen, Astoria finally accepted. However, the moment she put the ring on her finger, the entire scene suddenly changed. Horizontal ellipsis. Astoria felt like she was going insane. Not only had the expected event not occurred, but she was actually carrying another child. Although childbirth was inevitable, she couldn't accept such a simplistic abbreviated process. That's not it. Too fast. Do it again. Astoria screamed sharply. I didn't do anything, and I'm given another child? Absolutely. And you, Draco, what are you standing there for? Come here and take off your shoes. Astoria shed her usual ladylike demeanor, exuding the demeanor of a queen. But as she finished her words, the room fell into a profound silence. Time slipped by quietly. Gradually, Astoria noticed something different. This dream seemed too real. The most obvious change was her husband's face. Although it hadn't changed, it was much more lively than before, and even the complex expression on his face was clearly visible, along with the stunned looks of his parents. Is this a dream? Astoria asked cautiously. In the sky, Ino watched everything unfold before him, his figure gradually fading into the night. Despite the darkness, he didn't rush to leave. Instead, he sat alone on the crescent moon in the sky. What he had just witnessed had made him discover something quite interesting. Perhaps due to magic, or perhaps for some unknown reason, the dream seemed no longer a solitary one. Ino leaned against the crescent moon, eyes tightly closed, as if in sleep. The events of the past had left him with a lingering worry. Although it was a dream, the subsequent connection of dreams still required a moral basis, at least the consent of the other party. Therefore, to prevent any immoral behavior, he settled down and carefully reviewed the past. After a while, Ino opened his eyes with a sense of relief. This had been a two-way journey. Draco had thought and made a request, and Astoria had accepted the ring, linking their dreams together. The only thing that surprised him was the enveloping nature of the dream, seemingly not confined to the dormitory room as he had intended. Although surprised, Ino had no intention of ending it. It's not a bad thing to let everyone have a sweet dream. Chapter 396, Hogwarts in a Dream. Tragedy seems to be the distillation of a story. Aristotle defined this in his Poetics, noting that tragedy can evoke pity, leading to emotional purification and moral improvement. Just like some of the people in the story, hailed as the bravest cowards, they spent their lives repenting, never changing. However, for someone weaving beautiful dreams, tragedy is not a consideration. Realizing that the umbrella had already covered a vast area, Ino rested against the moon. A familiar park scene. Verdant grass spread like a velvet carpet, dotted with gentle lilies. Each lily exuded the warmth of a peaceful and tranquil life, and even the air was filled with a reassuring scent. Amidst this rind meadow, a camphor tree, so large it would take two people to embrace it, stood quietly, as if gently telling a story of the past. Its trunk was interwoven with the traces of light and time, and its leaves swaying in the wind felt like long-lost friends. The scene was peaceful and harmonious, yet Snape felt a deep-seated fear. The place before him was too familiar, so familiar that he wanted to turn and run. But a subconscious reluctance and lingering desire slowed his pace, his steps gentle as if he didn't want to hurt the grass. 29 years to love someone, 9 years to wait for someone, a lifetime to repent. Gazing at the nearby camphor tree, Snape finally stopped. Neither moving forward nor leaving, he simply stood there in silence. He didn't know how to face it. Harry had been happier than anyone else that year, but with the questions and potions class, he felt a deep sense of loss. It seemed his talent for potions hadn't lasted. However, a meeting in the corridor on the 4th floor in the second half of his first year opened his eyes to a different perspective. 3 Gryffindors, one with dazzling red hair, one with emerald green eyes, and the other a girl with a brilliant and sharp mind. What you think will come true. Gradually, the 3 figures merged, and a gentle woman emerged before Snape's eyes. Lilies blossomed in the sunlight. This time, Snape didn't flee, but neither did he speak first. His once empty eyes were now filled with guilt and remorse. Time slipped silently as they stared into each other's gaze. A long moment passed. Don't you want to say something, Sev? A clear voice broke the long silence. Lily. Snape called out, seemingly exhausting all his strength. Go on. Hearing the call, the young Lily raised an eyebrow, folding her arms across her chest, a listening expression on her face. A familiar figure, a familiar expression. Snape was transported back to that summer. In this moment, he could no longer conceal his feelings. "I'm sorry. I truly am. I know I can't undo what I did, but I've done my best to protect your son, all my life." Snape slumped down on the soft grass, unsure of what was happening. Though the scene before him felt strange, he couldn't dwell on it. Young Lily silently gazed at her former friend, curious about their sudden appearance, yet also filled with a sense of delight. In her memory, the moment the green killing curse struck her, time seemed to freeze, and the world turned gray, as if veiled by a veil. However, Lily's brief silence made Snape feel as if each day was truly a passing eternity. Every second felt like an agonizing agony, but just as he was on the verge of collapse, a clear voice echoed in his ears, "Oh, forget it. Tell me about Harry, how is he?" At the same time, Dumbledore also arrived at Fertile Head. While most people believe his home was in Godric's Hollow, Fertile Head was actually where he was born and where he spent a carefree childhood. It was only after his sister Ariana met with tragedy at the age of 6 that his family moved to Godric's Hollow. He remembered his parents' smiles, his sister's tranquility, the haunting childhood house, and, of course, his brother Aberforth, with his strange face, yet equally aged. Dumbledore's azure eyes welled with tears as he watched the scene unfold. "Really? I've only encountered a fly in my dreams." Aberforth, witnessing everything, grumbled bitterly. But it was merely a complaint. Seeing the weeping old man, he didn't choose to chase him away or do anything else. After a long moment, Dumbledore gradually regained his composure and walked straight towards his family. "Stand there. That's your place, don't come any closer." Aberforth, seeing his stepbrother trying to move forward, quickly stopped him. "Aberforth. He's your brother." A gentle but firm voice rang out. It was Kendra Dumbledore, the three siblings' mother, a powerful witch who had enjoyed a certain reputation in her lifetime. Despite his mother's rebuke, Aberforth, now a head of silver hair, remained as quiet and withdrawn as he had in childhood. This scene caused Ariana to chuckle. Seeing his mother waving at him, Dumbledore, standing in the distance, hurried forward without a second thought. He had so much to confirm. Was it a dream, a memory, or something else entirely? Night gently caressed the earth, granting all creatures a peaceful slumber. Yet, time never stood still. As the first rays of morning light shyly appeared on the horizon, like a warrior wielding a sword, severing the shackles of night, the splendor of dawn quietly unfolded. The sky gradually shifted from deep blue to pale purple, then to vibrant orange-red, like a miracle on a palette, each stroke filled with vibrant brilliance. Everything awoke in the morning light, the forbidden forest in the distance, the vast black lake, and the silent, majestic castle. One early October morning, Hogwarts looked different. More precisely, the castle remained unchanged, only the people within it had changed. Awakening in the morning, everyone in the castle, professors and staff alike, seemed to have freed themselves from the heavy shackles they had long carried. A light shone in each of their eyes. Of course, their expressions were distinct. It could be relief, satisfaction, or perhaps a sense of loss after letting go of a burden. Pansy fell into the latter category. In her dream yesterday, she met the person she'd wanted to see, but didn't receive the response she'd hoped for. Faced with the expected rejection, she wasn't as sad as she'd imagined. Perhaps, as he'd said, the best ending for a student's day crush is to let it end there. As the morning light filtered through the tower, students, having washed up, filed into the great hall. While the dream was beautiful, life still had to go on. Breakfast was essential. And Ino, the instigator of this whole situation, lazily lay in bed, refusing to get up no matter what. He was exhausted last night. Not only had he politely declined Pansy's offer, but he'd also entered Dumbledore's dream. Dumbledore's dream, in particular, and his conversation with the old headmaster and his family, had revealed many new things. It seemed dreams connect more than just the living. "When I'm done, I'll go to the Hall of the Dead." Lying on his soft bed, Ino added another item to his itinerary. What he saw last night made him realize that some dead people can appear in dreams. Meow. I wish everyone good eyesight, good sleep, and breakfast on time. Chapter 397, A Change of Fate, Harry and Neville. To many, dreams might be seen as merely complex and mysterious physiological phenomena. This perception stems from the fact that everyone experiences them to some degree. Perhaps when something becomes commonplace, it naturally ceases to be mysterious. Of course, this is just the average person's perspective. In some mystical theories, dreams are not only omens of the future, but also portals to parallel worlds. However, this is still too far-fetched for a young wizard. Most people in the castle simply believe they've had a bizarre and blissful dream. Like Harry and Neville. In the Gryffindor common room, amidst everyone's contented expressions, Harry and Neville stood out. In a way, the two were indeed similar, both born in July and both deprived of parental love. But in comparison, Neville was more fortunate. Despite his lack of fame, he was able to see his parents, even though they lay in St. Mungo's hospital for years. Harry, on the other hand, was different. He could only see his parents through photographs or the mirror of a priest. However, after just one night, the two men's states were drastically different from the day before. At the old house in Godric's Hollow, Harry saw the figures that haunted him in his dreams. Though his parents looked older than in their photos, the moment he saw them, tears welled up in his eyes. Harry had imagined that if he could one day meet his parents, he would tell them all the grievances he had endured. He would tell them about the bullying he endured as a child by his irritating Uncle Vernon and Cousin Dudley, the excitement he felt when he first received an owl, the nervousness he felt when he first met Hagrid. But upon actually meeting them, Harry suddenly realized that all his thoughts had left him speechless. The three of them embraced, and surrounded by their parents, all the past grievances seemed to fade away. This sense of lightness was like a gentle breeze in Godric's Hollow, blowing through the branches outside the window without carrying away a single leaf. This time, unlike the mirror of Erisden his first year, Harry knew for sure that the people before him were his own parents, not some imaginary reflection. After that initial embrace, Harry finally experienced what he had always dreamed of, a family birthday party. Although his birthday was July 31st, and it was now early October, who cared? His mother baked a cake, his father opened his treasured bottle of Ogden's aged fire whiskey, and the candles were lit and extinguished after a wish was made. The joy of reunion not only washed away the past sadness, but also accelerated the flow of time. It was clearly an entire night, but it felt like only a moment had passed. It seemed like the inertia of fate. Similarly, Neville was experiencing the same thing as Harry. In his dream, Neville's birthday party was at St. Mungo's Hospital. In the hospital room, Neville looked at his parents, their silver hair. They were not yet 40, but they looked as old as 70. However, after seeing them awake, a dramatic scene unfolded in the hospital room. Neville saw his usually strong and strict grandmother, now cautiously hiding behind him, crying. The cycle of fate. This reminded him of his childhood. It seemed that whenever he encountered anything, he would hide quietly behind his grandmother, one hand clutching her robes, timidly peeking out. But Neville knew that his grandmother wasn't truly timid now, she was afraid that any noise would wake him from his dream. Neville, you've grown taller again. Mrs. Longbottom looked at her son intently. The slightly hoarse voice brought tears to the usually resolute Neville's eyes. He had been suppressing his excitement because his grandmother was hiding behind him, and he had to be strong. But with his mother's call, his heart could no longer contain itself. Quickly, Neville ran to his mother's side, kneeling gently beside the bed, looking at her haggard face. Mom. Silly boy. Although I can't speak, I feel you every time you come. Mrs. Longbottom reached out and gently stroked her son's cheek. I have a gift for you. Wait for me. As she spoke, she reached for the bedside drawer. Neville quietly watched his mother's movements from the side. He knew what was in the drawer, dozens of colorful candy wrappers. Every time he and his grandmother visited his parents, their mother would slip a candy wrapper into his hand before leaving. A beautiful piece of candy wrapper seemed to express all the love her unconscious mother could muster. A moment later, as the drawer opened, Neville saw the most beautiful flower in the world, a vibrant carnation folded from a rainbow of candy wrappers. Beside the bouquet, other small objects crafted from candy wrappers, colorful wizard chess pieces, hopping paper frogs, flying paper cranes, and multicolored little stars. Unlike the quiet bouquet, when the drawer was opened, the colorful cranes and little stars, as if imbued with magic, began to dance around the pristine white ward. Red, yellow, blue, the different colored candy wrappers seemed to glow, making the entire ward look like a dream. I'm sorry. I've been meaning to fold it for you, but my body keeps getting in the way, and I'm so rarely lucid. Mrs. Longbottom's words brought tears to Neville's eyes. He hadn't known, truly hadn't known that his mother could still be lucid. No one had ever told him. If he had known this earlier, he would have preferred to do nothing, to stay in this hospital room with his parents forever. At the same moment, Mr. Longbottom arrived, supporting his elderly mother. 3 generations of the family sat quietly in the hospital room, surrounded by paper cranes and stars. Soon, at Mrs. Longbottom's suggestion, they also held a birthday dinner for Neville. This was also the only time Neville would celebrate his birthday with his parents and grandmother. There was no cake, no champagne, only a bouquet of carnations made from candy wrappers. Dawn broke. Daybreak, and the dream was over. In the Gryffindor dormitory, Neville and Harry opened their eyes simultaneously. For a moment, their bright eyes shone like stars. If not for the thick curtains, few would have dared to look them in the face. Soon, the light faded. Though separated by the curtains, they both performed a coordinated gesture, slowly opening their palms. Neville held a wrinkled candy wrapper, Harry a wooden whiskey bottle cork. However, neither of them knew that the moment they opened their eyes, in the distant London Ministry of Magic, in the Prophecy Hall of the Department of Mysteries, an ordinary crystal ball quietly vanished from the vast, immaculate shelves. Its abrupt disappearance was like snow meeting the rising sun, a silent, sublimating dissipation. But no one cared, for the prophecies stored there were so many. Gryffindor dormitories. As the curtains were raised, everyone in the 5-person dormitory was filled with energy. But Harry and Neville stood out the most. Neville seemed more composed. This wasn't due to his height or physique, even though he certainly looked strong. This composure came from within. At a glance, he reminded one of the mighty mountains and rivers, sturdy, steady, and reliable. Harry had also undergone a dramatic change. Upon waking, Harry was no longer the listless and sluggish state he'd been in. He now looked full of energy, as if protected by a mysterious magic. Chapter 398 Seeds again. Perhaps dreams don't affect the cycle of day and night. But they do affect the rhythm of life. From morning till dawn, the castle was filled with a happy and warm atmosphere for the entire day. Even the harsh castle caretaker, Filch, didn't keep a close eye on the students. Today, when Filch saw students performing spells in the corridor, he would actively lean over to listen. He even explained the procedure to a first-year student who couldn't perform a levitation spell with a serious expression. Then, something magical happened. With Filch's theoretical support and detailed instructions, the young wizard actually performed a levitation spell on the spot. Upon seeing the success, Filch smiled with satisfaction, as if everything was meant to be. And the magic didn't end there. When classes began at 9 o'clock in the morning, everyone noticed a change in the professors. Professor Snape, who hadn't washed his hair in years, shampooed it for the first time and even changed into new robes. While the robes remained their usual dark, solid color, the fabric and texture clearly revealed their high cost. The other professors had also changed. Professor McGonagall, for example, still wore a stern expression throughout the day, but the slight smile at the corner of her mouth seemed to silently reveal her feelings. Everything seemed beautiful. 9:30 a.m. Ino slowly opened his sleepy eyes. In fact, since arriving in 6th year, the number of courses at Hogwarts had been much shorter. Even many required courses could be dropped if one lacked confidence in passing the final exam. Even the usually strict Professor McGonagall turned a blind eye. Perhaps this was just the castle's tradition. After all, if a student struggled with a subject, it was better to save time and use it on subjects where he had a talent. It also prevented him from failing a newt that he could have passed. Thus, Ino enjoyed the joys of an English education. After getting out of bed, a letter on the desk caught his attention. The Slytherin dormitories, located underground, didn't have their own dedicated tower like the Ravenclaws. Therefore, breakfast in the Great Hall was often the time for mail and packages. The sudden appearance of letters in the dormitory meant only 2 possibilities: either they were left by Draco, or the dormitory had been broken into. Ino leaned more towards the latter, as the only creature in the castle capable of stealthily infiltrating a Slytherin dormitories was a phoenix. Furthermore, given the unique circumstances of last night, his conversation with Dumbledore had been brief. After a quick wash, Ino opened the letter. It contained a brief invitation, simply a request for a meeting. He knew the reason for this invitation without hesitation. In his dream, Dumbledore had been the only one to display reasonable rationality. This rationality wasn't a sign of callousness, but rather a manifestation of long-term thinking. Ino put the letter down with a smile. It was proof enough of the old headmaster's far-sightedness. As the weaver of beautiful dreams, he wouldn't refuse if he could. After a brief delay, Ino changed his clothes and left the dormitory. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the Slytherin common room wasn't crowded, with a few students sitting scattered about. Despite this small crowd, everyone was filled with a fulfilling and joyful atmosphere. This atmosphere, after leaving the common room, permeated the entire castle. Every brick, every portrait, every piece of armor. Perhaps it was the instigator of this whole thing, or perhaps it was the pen that saw his name accepted and written into the headmaster's register. For the first time, Ino truly felt the emotions of the castle. No one can know all the secrets of Hogwarts. In the corridor, he thought of Dumbledore's words from the original story. It wasn't an exaggeration, it was probably true. It wasn't that the castle held endless secrets, but rather that it had emotions that might never be fully understood. With a faint stream of thoughts swirling in his mind, Ino had already stepped onto the moving stairs. The headmaster's office on the 8th floor. On an early autumn morning, the bright sunlight streamed in, dispelling the languor after waking up and bringing warmth and vitality to the room. "Professor, I can't answer your questions right now. There are many things I don't even understand." Ino spoke calmly, but a hint of helplessness lingered on his face. Half an hour ago, he had arrived at the headmaster's office and, as expected, was greeted by Dumbledore's request: could Ariana be resurrected? Honestly, had the answer been readily apparent before today? He wasn't Teacher Hans. Compared to his nearly limitless magical stories, his tiny valley, a mere 70,000 square kilometers, was truly limited. There were no golden apple trees or three-leaf snakes in the valley, only a single red windmill. Meanwhile, after Ino's statement, Dumbledore didn't seem too disappointed. "I was too impatient. I've waited almost a century, and yet I still seem impatient. But there's something I can give you in advance. I hope it's of some use to you." Dumbledore sighed softly, then stood up and walked towards a nearby cabinet. Ino turned around in surprise. Honestly, the thing in the entire castle that most intrigued him was this dark beechwood cabinet. It seemed as if all the headmaster's treasures were stored there: candy, snacks, horcruxes, a pensieve. It was like a child's oversized storage box, storing everything he cared about. After a brief delay, Dumbledore pulled out a small, square box. Not only was the Honeydukes logo printed on one side, but underneath, small text read, "Customized blowing super bubble gum." Seeing Dumbledore's cautious demeanor, Ino couldn't help but curl his lips. He'd expected something interesting, but it turned out to be just a box of candy. As the box opened, his expression quickly shifted from amusement to shock. Inside the 2-inch box, a bright red gem lay prominently. It wasn't large, perhaps the size of a pea, but its overall shape resembled an uncut stone, an irregular polyhedron. Crystal clear, radiant as blood. Though carelessly placed in a bubble gum box, Ino had a clue at first glance. Yes, this is the Philosopher's Stone Nico entrusted to me. As a youthful alchemist, I couldn't bear to see it destroyed. Dumbledore reached out and pushed the box forward. Nearby, Ino, upon seeing the Philosopher's Stone within, had a strange thought. As mentioned before, Hod's story held countless miracles, but his valley also possessed a unique miracle: the ability to grow things. Whether it was the magic beans of Grimm's brothers or the stones of Rohan, everything in the valley was grown. At that moment, he truly wanted to bury the Philosopher's Stone in the valley and see what would grow. After all, a pea-sized gem looked like a seed, so it would be a shame not to bury it in the soil. Happy day, everyone. It's early autumn now, with a gentle breeze. Don't forget to take a stroll on a cool evening. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 399, The Change of the Castle Atmosphere. As the only legendary alchemical artifact known to extend lifespan, the Philosopher's Stone is truly a miracle. It was thanks to this miracle that Nicholas Flamel and his wife, Perenelle, lived for over 600 years. Ino gently lifted the Philosopher's Stone from its box, examining it carefully in his palm. The sunlight reflected a brilliant hue. Perhaps, had anyone else offered the stone, They would have considered it an exchange of favors, but Dumbledore, who is willing to do so, probably wouldn't have given it such thought. Regardless, Ino felt it necessary to speak up, to avoid any potential grudges. Professor, it's an honor to witness this miracle of alchemy, but I must be clear, while I'll do my best, I can't guarantee certain things. If possible, he would offer his assistance in secret, as a reward for the old man's lifelong hard work. If not, he could only continue dreaming. That's enough, really. Dumbledore nodded with a smile, seemingly understanding Ino's point. Actually, Ariana is a little special. As a brother, I can't choose for her what I think is best. Hearing this, Ino put down the Philosopher's Stone, leaned back on the sofa, and sighed. That's wonderful. But so many people don't understand this truth. Suddenly, he felt that Dumbledore truly deserved this reputation. Self-denial for the benefit of others. It's easy to say, but truly difficult to do. If anyone in the world wanted to resurrect Ariana, Dumbledore would always be the first, even surpassing Ariana herself. Perhaps, for Dumbledore, his sister's resurrection was not only a continuation of family ties, but also a relief. Aside. After hearing Ino sigh, Dumbledore said seriously, I can't be selfish, even though I was selfish once in my youth. I have no right to dictate Ariana's life. So you'd better discuss this. Ino laughed, but such a heavy topic seemed out of place on such a sunny morning. Ho ha, fine. If there's another chance, we'll definitely discuss it. Dumbledore laughed heartily, then added with a pun. Then we'll have to wait. After all, night and day always need a balance. As a weaver, Ino had no objection to sweet dreams, not at all. However, dreams and reality must always be distinguished. Someone once said that sweet dreams are a good medicine for life, but medicine is also poisonous, and long-term use may be detrimental to life. While Ino was in the headmaster's office on the 8th floor, Professor McGonagall was also receiving her guests on the 3rd floor of the castle. Neville, technically, this note requires your grandmother's signature. Although you're already in 6th year, you're still not an adult. Professor McGonagall looked at Neville with some trepidation. She knew the students before her. He was a rare good kid in years, well behaved from the moment he started school, with none of the mischievousness typical of a Gryffindor. Meanwhile, although Neville had been prepared, he still looked disappointed after being clearly rejected. Seeing this, Professor McGonagall rubbed her brow. She wasn't afraid of students like George and Fred. At worst, she'd fight violence with violence. But it was people like Neville who really bothered her. They stood there silently, staring at her. Tell me. What exactly are you doing? Professor McGonagall asked, a little weary. This time, Neville didn't remain silent, quietly stating his purpose. I want to go to St. Mungo's to see my parents. Hearing this reason, Professor McGonagall was stunned. She had thought of many strange excuses, but this one hadn't come up. Recalling Neville's experience, Professor McGonagall pondered for a few seconds before sighing softly. Go ahead. Remember to say hello for me. She then picked up the quill beside her and quickly signed her name. Thank you, Professor McGonagall. Neville's face lit up with joy as he accepted the signed consent form. Honestly, after waking up this morning and figuring everything out, he couldn't wait a moment longer. The thought of his parents actually having moments of lucidity was something he had never imagined. Neville blamed himself for this. Not only had he been unable to control himself as a child, but as he grew older, he hadn't truly considered the situation, instead relying on the opinions of the St. Mungo's doctors. He believed his parents were beyond recovery from the damage done by the Cruciatus curse, retaining only a few functions. But yesterday's experience had truly awakened him. As a child, he'd spent entire days in the ward. He didn't know when it started, but whenever he visited St. Mungo's, he'd simply peer in through the window. And the thought of his mother, perhaps waiting alone, for his only visit of the year, was enough to make him realize it. Therefore, Neville truly didn't want to delay even a moment longer. If it weren't for his grandmother's feelings, he would have even considered dropping out of school and leaving. Meanwhile, as Neville walked down the path to Hogsmeade, the atmosphere in the castle suddenly grew strange. Perhaps strange isn't quite accurate, ambiguous would be more appropriate. Whether Muggle or wizard, the youthful campus always seems to be full of hormones. Draco and Astoria weren't the only ones to have met in a dream, but they were arguably the most awkward. At the end of the 4th floor corridor, the usually quiet trophy room was now home to 2 senior wizards. Draco felt awkward, unsure how to face Astoria, In fact, Draco wasn't the only one feeling awkward. Observing her silence, Astoria tacitly kept silent. She wasn't sure when she developed feelings for him, though they'd first met long before. Back then, she hadn't even started Hogwarts, but due to her mother's instructions, she had to accompany Daphne to the so-called class reunion. Normally, going there without an invitation would have been abrupt and rude. Astoria remembered the situation clearly. Besides herself and Daphne, there were 3 others present: Swinburne, Parkinson, and Draco. But the first person to react and respond was the boy, a year her senior. He not only politely eased her awkwardness but also enthusiastically introduced them to each other. Perhaps the seeds of affection had already been planted. But possessing this affection didn't mean Astoria could accept everything that happened yesterday. She'd met his parents for no apparent reason, and even more outrageously, she'd been holding her daughter in her arms. Meanwhile, perhaps realizing the silence wouldn't last, Draco spoke first, breaking the silence. "Well, I like Lucy very much." Hearing this, Astoria nearly gasped. She'd expected an explanation, some comfort, perhaps even a confession. But the truth was, he'd simply spoken of his fondness for children. "I think you've made a mistake, Mr. Malfoy," Astoria said with her remaining rationality. "It was just a dream, nothing happened between us." "How is that possible?" "It might be a reflection of the future," Draco said anxiously. In fact, he couldn't pretend that nothing had happened. The warmth of his wife, daughter and family last night made him gradually understand the sacrifices his father had made. Draco's anxious look made Astoria feel very interesting. The future can be changed. Besides, you haven't taken any action so far. After that, Astoria turned around and left the trophy display room. On the other side, Draco listened to these almost explicit words and chased after her without thinking. Wait a minute. Chapter 400. Wrong start, right end. What happened in the trophy room on the 4th floor wasn't accidental, it was a microcosm of the castle itself. Many people who had previously harbored feelings for each other had confessed their feelings for each other after last night's experience. Ino was completely oblivious to the subtle shift in the castle's atmosphere. A sudden piece of news disrupted his plans. "Professor, are you saying that Harry's protective spell has changed?" "That's approximately true," Dumbledore nodded slightly. "In fact, before you arrived, the portrait hanging in the Gryffindor common room already told me about Harry's change. Besides, I can't think of any other reason that could have changed Harry except that spell." Listening to Dumbledore's explanation, Ino fell into deep thought. The protective spell that Lily had cast at the cost of her own life was undoubtedly extremely powerful. He had personally experienced Voldemort's killing curse, a powerful, swift, and murderous spell that ordinary wizards would likely only be able to await. Even the powerful killing curse proved ineffective against Harry's guardian magic, a fact that begs admiration for its power. However, beneath this powerful power lies a very strict limitation. This is reflected in the original story, where Harry must spend his summers at Aunt Petunia's. Family, blood, and kinship seem to be the foundation of this guardian magic. However, throughout the original story, this guardian magic seems to have only been used twice, once when Harry was an infant and once when he came into contact with Quirrell. Although Voldemort later resurrected and cleverly used Harry's blood to break the spell, even so, this guardian magic seems rather useless in the overall story. Hearing Dumbledore's description, Ino had a bold hypothesis. Perhaps, Harry never experienced family affection, so his mother's magic never truly worked. This wasn't just a random guess, Harry's life experience alone showed it. Faced with a neurotic aunt, a volatile uncle, and a cousin who loved boxing all the time. Living in this kind of atmosphere, it was doubtful Harry could truly appreciate family affection. Overhearing Ino's speculation, Dumbledore nodded in agreement. "You're right. Magic unleashed with love and affection also requires love and affection to flourish. But there's more good news than that. If all goes well, there are things we can prepare for." As he spoke, Dumbledore silently gazed out the window. The Forbidden Forest in early autumn, while lush and green, also had a solemn air. Harry's weakness and malaise were all due to Snape's potion, a poison to his soul. But now Harry was completely different, and the reason was obvious, a change in his soul. What Dumbledore thought, Ino thought too. And Ino thought even more. Today's events left him with a sense of absurdity. Perhaps it was like trying so hard to solve a puzzle, expending countless resources, only to discover the answer was right there. As soon as this thought occurred to Ino, it felt both absurd and real. Perhaps the original story's sacrifice of so many people was wrong from the start. What if, during Harry's childhood, someone truly cared for him, improved his relationship with his aunt and uncle, and allowed the magic lily had sacrificed her life to work? Perhaps forgiveness and release, the continuation of family ties, a happy childhood, these were the truest ways to unfold this story. Then, perhaps, all the tragedies that unfolded later in life wouldn't have happened. It's clearly a fairy tale, but it's being told from an adult's perspective. One wrong step, and all the rest. Thinking of this, Ino spoke with relief. "Professor, are you interested in hearing a story? A simple fairy tale, distorted by adults." Time slipped by in a trance. That evening, Hogwarts fell into an unprecedented silence. Everyone, students, professors, and staff like Filch and Moody, had returned to their dormitories early after dinner. After washing up, he quietly settled into bed, filled with anticipation. Slytherin dormitories. Draco sat in a chair, neither speaking nor going to bed, blinking pitifully. Faced with such a look, Ino was the first to give in. "Draco, you have to understand one thing, Christmas presents can only be received on Christmas. If they were received every day, no one would look forward to Christmas anymore." "But I miss my daughter," Draco said happily. Honestly, for a moment, Ino wanted to take out a video camera and film it, showing it to Lucius and his wife, so they could see what nonsense their son was talking about. He should be at an age where he should be dating, and instead he's saying he wants a daughter. Right now, someone should be thinking about giving him a daughter. In that case, you can get married after graduation. Now go to bed and stop going crazy here. With that, Ino ignored Draco and waved his hand, causing the thick bed curtains to automatically drop. With the curtains falling, a closed space formed around the bed. Ino lay on the soft bed, but his thoughts didn't stop. Honestly, today had been quite a few surprises. Not only did he unexpectedly find the Philosopher's Stone, which was supposed to be destroyed, but he also witnessed Harry's transformation, and the subsequent changes that followed. Harry's transformation was the most gratifying, as it meant many things could be concluded early. The beginning of a fairy tale should end in a fairy tale. Ino thought of the recent publication of Hogwarts Once Upon a Time, Trelawney's prophecy. Beneath a rainbow sky, the Dark Lord would be completely eliminated, and candy would rain down. Honestly, when he first read the prophecy, he hadn't given it much thought. But today's experience had made him wholeheartedly appreciate this ending. Harry's story had begun the wrong way, but now it could end the right way. While there were some regrets along the way, for many things, a perfect ending is a blessing. Similarly, thinking of the ending, Ino couldn't help but recall his experience in the headmaster's office that morning. Before their final farewell, he told Dumbledore a story with an alternative storyline. In that story, Hogwarts was stormed, many lives were lost, there were many regrets, and also many unspoken emotions. At the end of the story, Ino reaffirms her earlier suspicions. If someone had truly helped Harry when he was little, hadn't he lived in a cramped attic, worn out in threadbare clothes, or even been used as a boxing trainer by his cousin, perhaps the tragedy that followed wouldn't have happened. After recounting this, Ino left the principal's office on her own initiative. Indeed, throughout the story, everyone has the power to choose, except Harry. From the moment the owl delivered the letter to the final resurrection, Harry seems to have passively endured. In fact, after writing this chapter, Zia pondered for a long time. The original Harry Potter story seemed wrong from the start. The redemption and forgiveness, the understanding and family love in the fairy tale. If Harry had experienced all of this in his childhood, perhaps the ending would have been different. There would have been no sacrifice, no regrets. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.